How does an empire rise from the windswept steppes to conquer half the known world, and yet leave behind more questions than answers? Buried beneath the vast silence of the Mongolian plains lie secrets that defy time, logic, and history. The Mongol Empire, born in the heart of Asia, expanded with terrifying speed, was more than just horsemen and conquest. It was an enigma wrapped in whispers, where rulers vanished without a trace, and where death itself was guarded with ruthless precision. Why was Genghis Khan's burial site hidden so completely that no one, not even his own descendants, could find it? What ancient code led his warriors to erase all signs of his final resting place and kill anyone who looked? And what of the mysterious artifacts found far from any battlefield? Traces of technologies, languages, and symbols that don't quite belong. This isn't just history, it's a puzzle scattered across deserts, rivers, and forgotten ruins. The more we uncover, the stranger the story becomes. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the chilling, awe-inspiring world of unexplained Mongolian Empire mysteries. The journey begins now. High in the wilds of northeastern Mongolia, where the plains bleed into thick forests and the Onan River cuts through the undisturbed land like a ribbon of silver, there exists a silence that feels deliberate. The wind moves low through the trees, rustling the tall grasses that have grown wild and uninterrupted for centuries. There are no signposts here, no monuments, only the quiet presence of time and a deep, lingering stillness that seems to whisper of something long buried, something sacred. This is Khenti Province, a rugged and remote region that many believe holds one of history's most enduring secrets, the final resting place of Genghis Khan. By the time of his death in 1227, Genghis Khan had forged the largest contiguous land empire the world had ever seen, stretching from the Pacific coast of China to the heartlands of Europe. He united the warring Mongol tribes under a single banner, revolutionized military strategy, and altered the course of civilizations. Yet for all his power, all his glory, his death was marked not by grandeur, but by secrecy. No contemporary chronicles describe where he was buried. No tomb has ever been found. According to Mongol tradition, his body was returned to his homeland, carried thousands of miles from his final campaign in western Xia. But where exactly it was laid to rest remains unknown. Some accounts claim that a vast procession accompanied his body back to Mongolia, only to slaughter all witnesses along the route to preserve the location's secrecy. Others suggest a team of loyal soldiers diverted rivers to conceal the burial ground, flooding it entirely and erasing all trace of human intervention. In one chilling legend, it is said that after the funeral, the soldiers who buried the Khan were themselves killed, and then their executioners took their own lives. A ritual of silence, a chain of oblivion. But why go to such extremes? To the Mongols, Genghis Khan was not merely a ruler. He was the chosen one, a man of destiny, born beneath a divine sign, fated to shape the world. His burial, then, was not just a matter of honoring the dead. It was an act of cosmic reverence. By hiding his grave, the Mongols may have believed they were protecting his spirit, preserving his power in the sacred earth of his homeland. Historical texts offer only fragmented clues. The secret history of the Mongols, written shortly after his death, omits mention of his burial entirely. Chinese records from the Yuan dynasty are equally vague, though some reference a sacred mountain known as Burkhan Khaldun, a place Genghis Khan is said to have visited often and revered deeply. Could this be the site? Some believe so. In the early 2000s, a team of researchers using satellite imaging identified unnatural patterns on the mountain slopes, possible signs of a man-made structure beneath the soil. yet the area remains heavily protected. In fact, large parts of the Kentii Mountains are designated off-limits, declared a strictly protected zone by the Mongolian government. The official reason? To preserve its natural environment. But others wonder, is it also to guard a secret? Archaeologists have tried to investigate, carefully, respectfully, but local resistance is strong. Many Mongolians, even today, believe disturbing the Khan's grave would bring great misfortune. It's not just a matter of history, it's a matter of sacred duty, of ancestral respect. Perhaps some things, they say, are not meant to be found, and yet, the search continues. In 2004, a joint Japanese-Mongolian team claimed to have discovered a possible tomb complex buried beneath layers of earth and rock. It lay some 250 kilometers east of Ulaanbaatar, near the Onon River, an area rich in Genghis Khan's personal history. Their findings were tantalizing. A rectangular structure, traces of wooden beams, even buried horse remains, possibly sacrificial, but nothing definitive. The excavation was halted. The site remains unexplored. Then there are the more speculative theories. Some suggest that the Khan was not buried at all, but cremated in accordance with older steppe traditions. Others claim his body was secretly taken to another country entirely, hidden far from the Mongolian landscape to prevent desecration by enemies. A few even propose that his tomb was designed to be mobile, a temporary symbolic site that moved across the land with the seasons, as Mongol camps once did. The most fringe of these theories suggest subterranean vaults, ancient maps hidden in temple walls, or cryptic alignments between sacred mountains. A 13th century Persian historian hinted at a palace of the dead, built for the great Khan and sealed with deadly traps. Could there be truth buried in such tales? Or are these merely echoes of legend, distorted by centuries of silence? What is certain is this: despite decades of searching, millions in funding, and advances in satellite technology, no one has definitively located the tomb of Genghis Khan. And maybe that's the point. In a world obsessed with visibility, with documentation and discovery, this enduring absence feels like a message in itself. Genghis Khan reshaped continents, built and destroyed kingdoms, and left behind a legacy that continues to shape nations. Yet in death, he chose, or perhaps demanded, to vanish completely. A final act of control over how he would be remembered, or forgotten. So we are left with a question that lingers like mist over the Mongolian highlands. If the greatest conqueror in history could disappear so completely, what else might still lie hidden, just beneath the surface? The cold winds sweep across the Hungarian plains, whispering through the ruins of medieval fortresses and the tall, yellow grasses that have grown where armies once marched. The earth here remembers. It remembers fire, blood, and hoofbeats, thousands of them pounding like thunder across a continent unprepared for what was coming. In the winter of 1241, Europe trembled beneath the shadow of a force unlike any it had known. The Mongol horde, commanded by Batu Khan and the legendary general Subutai, had already shattered the armies of Poland and Hungary. Krakow burned. The flower of European chivalry lay dead in fields soaked with frost and blood. With uncanny speed and ruthless coordination, the Mongols had crossed mountains, rivers, and kingdoms, leaving devastation in their wake. And then, in the spring of 1242, they vanished. No final battle, no siege of Vienna, no climactic confrontation, just silence. The armies that had seemed unstoppable simply turned around and disappeared beyond the Carpathians, retreating into the vastness from which they came. To the stunned Europeans left behind, it felt as if death itself had passed them by, and spared them without reason. But why? The most widely accepted explanation points to the death of Ögedei Khan, the Great Khan and son of Genghis Khan, in December of 1241. According to Mongol custom, all members of the royal lineage were expected to return to the Mongol heartland to participate in the selection of a new ruler. Batu, a grandson of Genghis Khan, would have been bound by this obligation, however reluctantly. And yet, the timing raises questions. Ögedei died in late 1241, but the withdrawal did not begin until months later, after the Mongols had already wintered in Hungary. They were well positioned to strike into Austria, Italy, even France. Europe lay exposed. No armies could have stopped them. Subutai, the tactical genius behind so many of their victories, was said to have drawn up plans for continued conquest. So what changed? Was the death of the Great Khan the true reason for their departure, or merely a convenient one? Some scholars suggest that internal divisions played a role. Batu's rivalry with other Mongol princes, particularly the sons of Ögedei, may have made a full campaign westward politically dangerous. Perhaps Batu feared that expanding too far without a secure position back home would leave him vulnerable. The Mongol Empire, after all, was as much a web of competing ambitions as it was a unified war machine. But others aren't so sure. In recent decades, new theories have emerged, each one adding layers to the enigma. One line of thought considers the environmental challenges the Mongols faced. The vast grasslands of the Eurasian steppe were the lifeblood of the Mongol cavalry. Europe's dense forests and wetter climate were less suitable for the massive number of horses required for their campaigns. The Hungarian plains had proven acceptable, temporarily, but farther west, the terrain shifted, the weather changed. Could logistical concerns have halted the advance? Possibly. But Mongol engineers were masters of adaptation. They had crossed deserts, rivers, and mountains. Would terrain alone have stopped them? Then there is the mysterious case of the Mongol winter camp near Esztergom. Archaeological surveys in the area have revealed traces of burned settlements and mass graves. Something happened during that winter. Did disease strike the Mongol ranks? Were there rebellions among the conquered populations? Some researchers speculate that outbreaks, possibly of dysentery or even plague, may have sapped the army's strength. Yet no contemporary sources confirm this, and the Mongols were known for their resilience in far harsher conditions. More fringe interpretations propose psychological warfare or supernatural signs. Chroniclers in Europe recorded eerie phenomena during the invasion: unusual comets, blood-red moons, even bizarre animal behavior. These may have been ordinary events seen through the lens of fear and desperation, or, some whisper, omens that caused hesitation even among the superstitious Mongol ranks. And then there's an even stranger possibility, one that circles quietly among a small group of independent historians and speculative writers. What if the retreat was strategic, not reactive? A pause, not a surrender. Subutai was famous for long-term planning, for laying traps that spanned hundreds of miles. Could the Mongol withdrawal have been an intentional regrouping meant to lull Europe into complacency? Did internal shifts back in Karakorum interrupt what was meant to be a two-stage conquest? If so, why did they never return? Or perhaps they did, just not in force. Some European accounts describe brief Mongol incursions in later years, scouts, raiding parties, even diplomatic envoys, always watching, always calculating. Could they have been assessing, even influencing Europe from the shadows, testing its resilience, waiting for another moment that never came? The truth, as always, may lie somewhere between record and rumor. In the absence of definitive answers, we're left with fragments: burned villages in Hungary, scattered Mongol artifacts deep in Central Europe, and the stunned writings of medieval scribes trying to understand why the storm had passed. And so, a century before the Black Death, a generation before the Renaissance and long before the name Genghis Khan became legend across the world. The Mongols came to Europe, and then they left. No message, no monument, no warning. Only a question, still echoing across the fields of Central Europe. Why did they stop? And if they hadn't, what would the world look like today? In the quiet chambers of a library in Beijing, behind protective glass and layers of scholarly translation, rests a curious and weathered manuscript. Its pages, now copies of lost originals, hold stories not just of conquest, but of prophecy, betrayal, and the forging of an empire that once threatened the known world. It is called The Secret History of the Mongols, and yet no one can say with certainty who wrote it or why it was hidden for so long. As we transition from the Mongols' silent withdrawal from Europe, a question lingers. How do we truly understand a people who left few monuments and even fewer written records of their own? The Mongol Empire was one of vast mobility. Its cities were tents, its archives oral. Yet this one text survives, unlike anything else in Mongol history. Written shortly after the death of Genghis Khan in 1227, The Secret History is the oldest surviving literary work in the Mongolian language. It is not a public chronicle carved in stone, nor a triumphalist epic meant for foreign courts. It was never intended for outsiders. As its name suggests, it was secret, preserved quietly, passed down through inner circles, and only centuries later discovered by the wider world. But what is it exactly? On the surface, The Secret History is a biography of Genghis Khan, his origins as Temujin, his rise from tribal exile to supreme ruler, his unification of the Mongol people. It recounts dreams, omens, battles, and betrayals with rich detail, sometimes poetic, often raw. We read of his kidnapping as a boy, his bloody revenge against childhood rivals, his extraordinary charisma, and his deep reliance on a handful of trusted allies. Yet woven through these accounts are peculiar silences and inconsistencies. There are moments where names are conspicuously absent, where motives remain unexplained, and where prophecy and myth seem to blend with fact. Why does the text end abruptly after Genghis Khan's death? Why does it omit any mention of his burial site or the fate of certain family members? What exactly was being hidden, and from whom? Scholars generally agree The Secret History was compiled by someone close to the inner court, possibly a court historian or even one of the Khan's sons. It was written in the Mongolian script of the time, but preserved only in a phonetic transcription into Chinese characters. The original version has never been found. This raises another mystery. How did such a foundational document, perhaps the single most important text in Mongolian cultural memory, disappear for centuries? And why did it resurface in China? The version we have today was discovered in the 14th century, during the Yuan dynasty, when Mongols ruled China. Chinese scholars, working under imperial orders, transcribed the Mongolian sounds into Chinese script, preserving the pronunciation but not the original letters. The result was a hybrid, part archive, part puzzle. When the Yuan dynasty fell, the text vanished again, buried in bureaucratic records, until a Russian scholar uncovered it in the early 20th century. And that's when the real questions began. Why would the Mongols, famously secretive and oral in their traditions, create such a detailed personal account of their leader's life? Was it a training manual for future Khans? A family record? A sacred text? Some researchers suggest it was written not for posterity, but as a form of confession, a reckoning by the ruling elite after Genghis Khan's death. The text is unusually honest about moments of failure, doubt, and violence. It does not sanitize the brutality of the Mongol rise. Could it have been meant for a closed audience, a guide for those who would lead the empire in the years to come? Others believe it may have had a ritual purpose, meant to be read aloud during succession ceremonies or moments of internal crisis. The structure of the document, with its rhythms and repetitions, resembles oral poetry. Its focus on dreams and portents suggests something closer to scripture than mere history. And then there are the fringe theories. Some claim the secret history contains hidden codes, numerological patterns or encrypted messages meant to preserve secret knowledge. A few even argue that the text hints at locations of sacred sites, including the lost tomb of Genghis Khan. Certain passages, when interpreted symbolically, describe mountains, rivers, and celestial alignments that resemble the geography of eastern Mongolia. Others go further still, pointing to the presence of mythic motifs, wolves descending from the heavens, prophetic dreams of blood rivers and iron hills, and argue that the text records not just historical events, but ancient cosmological beliefs passed down for generations. Was Genghis Khan seen not just as a ruler, but as the fulfillment of a prophecy? A divine agent born to reset the order of the world? These interpretations, of course, remain speculative. The beauty and the challenge of the secret history lies in its ambiguity. It is both intimate and remote. It gives us names, places, and emotions, but it also withholds. There are gaps no translation can fill, silences no scholarship can fully explain. And perhaps that is the point. Just as the Mongols vanished from Europe without warning, just as the tomb of their greatest leader remains hidden beneath the soil of an unnamed mountain, so too does their greatest literary treasure resist easy understanding. It is a mirror held up to an empire that was never fully meant to be known, only felt, feared, and remembered in fragments. So we are left to ask, if this single text is all that remains of the Mongols' own voice, what else did they choose to keep silent? And what secrets still sleep, unread, beneath the dust of centuries? Along the southern shores of Japan's Kyushu Island, the sea breathes with a quiet rhythm. Salted winds carry the scent of pine, and the cries of seabirds glide over the crashing waves. Beneath the waters, however, hidden in silence, lie broken timbers, rusted iron, and the ghosts of an armada that never returned. In 1274 and again in 1281, the Mongol Empire, the most expansive and unstoppable military force the world had ever seen, turned its gaze to Japan. By then, the great Khans had already subdued China, Korea, Central Asia, Persia, and much of Eastern Europe. With the fall of the Song dynasty, Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan and ruler of the Yuan dynasty, believed it was time to bring the islands of Japan into the Mongol world. But what followed was not conquest. It was disappearance, not only of ships, but of clarity. The first invasion came swiftly. In 1274, a fleet of hundreds of vessels carrying Mongol, Chinese, and Korean soldiers crossed the Korea Strait. The campaign was brutal and unfamiliar to the Japanese, who were accustomed to ritualized combat. The Mongols used coordinated volleys of arrows, explosive bombs made with gunpowder, and tight infantry formations. Villages were razed. Samurai were cut down in waves, yet just as quickly as the Mongols appeared, they vanished. A sudden storm struck the fleet as it anchored off the coast. Ships were shattered, bodies flung into the sea. Survivors limped back to the mainland, the campaign unfinished. 7 years later, Kublai Khan returned, with vengeance and preparation. The 1281 expedition was vast, perhaps the largest naval invasion the world had seen up to that point. Sources speak of nearly 4,000 ships and more than 140,000 men drawn from across the empire. The force was divided into two massive fleets, one from Korea, one from China. They were to converge on Japan and crush it once and for all. But again, the sea would not permit it. After weeks of stalemate and sporadic land skirmishes, a typhoon, more violent than the first, swept across the Kyushu coast. The armada, densely packed in Hakata Bay and unfamiliar with Japanese waters, was obliterated. Thousands of ships were dashed against rocks, soldiers drowned in their armor. The invasion force, carefully assembled over years, was lost almost entirely in a single night. In Japanese memory, this event became legendary. The storm was no accident, they believed. It was a divine wind, a kamikaze, sent by the gods to protect the islands, and so it passed into myth. But when we step back, when we strip away the reverence and look through the lens of mystery, questions begin to rise from the surf. Was it truly just a storm? Historical records confirm the destruction, but details are murky. Japanese chronicles, like the Hachiman Gudokan, describe celestial signs, sudden winds, and even glowing lights above the water. Mongol and Chinese sources are unusually quiet, often vague or evasive. Some modern historians wonder, could internal sabotage, logistical failure, or poor coordination have played a larger role than nature alone? The two fleets, Korean and Chinese, reportedly failed to unite on time. The Chinese contingent waited offshore for weeks, their ships crowded, supplies dwindling, disease spreading. Could poor planning, combined with a sudden typhoon, have turned a mismanaged campaign into catastrophe? Others suggest the Mongol fleet was never seaworthy to begin with. Archaeological dives in Imari Bay and Takashima have unearthed fragments of ships, many built hastily, possibly using riverboat techniques unsuitable for open sea. Some appear to lack keels or proper reinforcements. A few may have even been repurposed merchant vessels, commandeered by imperial order. Was the mighty invasion fleet a patchwork of compromised construction? Then there are the more speculative theories. One idea, circulated among naval historians and fringe scholars, proposes that the 1281 fleet was a fleet of illusions, meant more to threaten than to succeed. Kublai Khan's hold over the newly conquered Chinese territories was not secure. Some suggest the campaign's real purpose was to unify a divided empire under a shared external enemy. If it failed, it could be spun as divine fate. If it succeeded, it would bring a new jewel into the Yuan crown. Was it a calculated gamble with acceptable losses? Still others have whispered of sabotage within the Mongol ranks. Korean sailors who, resenting forced conscription, may have steered ships off course or refused to cooperate at critical moments. Could internal dissent have doomed the fleet before the typhoon ever arrived? One of the strangest tales to emerge, told in obscure 14th century Japanese scrolls, speaks of foreign fire on the waves. Flames that danced across the masts before the storm, consuming ships from within. Today, some interpret this as a metaphor for onboard fires caused by early gunpowder weapons or accidents, but others wonder if these were signs of panic, or something else entirely. As divers continue to explore the underwater graveyards off Kyushu, more pieces of the puzzle are slowly emerging. Ship fragments, bronze weapons, helmets etched with unfamiliar symbols. In 2011, archaeologists discovered a remarkably preserved part of a Mongol warship, its hull still intact beneath layers of mud. And yet, even these discoveries raise more questions than they answer. Why were so many ships found clustered in vulnerable positions, suggesting poor anchorage and planning? Why were some hulls burned while others appear to have sunk fully intact? Where are the command vessels, the remains of leadership, the central archive that must have accompanied an army of this size? None have been found, and so the fate of the Mongol invasions of Japan remains suspended between legend and uncertainty. The storms were real, the losses were devastating, but the full truth of how the world's greatest empire was humbled by a small island nation, continues to drift beneath the waves. In the silence left behind, we're left to wonder, did divine winds truly save Japan? Or was there another force at work, hidden in history's deep tide? High on the windswept plateaus of Mongolia, where the grasses roll endlessly beneath pale skies and herds move like shadows across the steppe, memory lingers in silence. There are no monuments here, no stone tablets inscribed with ancient edicts. And yet, somewhere in this vast openness, it is said that the laws of an empire once echoed in every hoofbeat, every command, every judgment passed by the heirs of Genghis Khan. These were not laws written for the world to see. They were known simply as Yassa, a word shrouded in secrecy, interpreted variously as decree, code, or sacred command. The Yassa was the spine of the Mongol Empire, the silent framework that governed a civilization which stretched from the Pacific to the Danube. Yet today, its full contents have vanished. As we move from the sunken wreckage of the Mongol fleet that perished before the shores of Japan, we turn our gaze inward, toward the internal structure of this great empire. Because for all their ferocity in battle, the Mongols were master administrators. They created a network of roads, enforced religious tolerance, standardized taxation, and punished corruption with brutal efficiency. Behind this order stood the Yassa, a set of rules that was said to be absolute, carried in memory, enforced in practice, and hidden from the eyes of outsiders. But what exactly was the Yassa? We know it was created under the direct authority of Genghis Khan, possibly beginning as early as 1206, the year he united the Mongol tribes. According to early Persian and Arab chroniclers, it was a collection of decrees issued by the Khan, compiled and expanded over time. It covered everything from military conduct and legal punishments to family life and administrative procedure. It was said to forbid theft, adultery, and bearing false witness. It dictated how armies should be organized, how messengers should be treated, and how animals were to be hunted. In some accounts, it even regulated religious rituals, offering space for shamans, Muslims, Christians, and Buddhists alike. Its principles were reportedly so strict that a golden cup could be left unguarded in the middle of a road without fear of theft. But here lies the mystery. No original copy has ever been found. There are no preserved scrolls, no carved inscriptions, no Mongolian manuscript titled Yassa in any known archive. What we know comes only from foreign sources. Historians of the Islamic world, Chinese bureaucrats, and European envoys. They describe the Yassa with awe and sometimes fear, but they never quote it directly. No one outside the inner court seems to have seen it in full. Why would such a foundational text disappear so completely? Some suggest it was never meant to be written in the first place. Genghis Khan, it is believed, distrusted the permanence of text, preferring the spoken word, preserved in loyal memory. The Yassa may have been an oral law, recited and remembered by appointed officials, perhaps guarded by a priestly or judicial caste within the empire. If so, its extinction may have been inevitable, lost as generations passed and memory faded. Others argue the Yassa was written down, but hidden. According to a few scattered reports, a golden book containing Genghis Khan's laws was kept in his tent or palace, only to be seen by his heirs and closest advisors. If true, the loss of that volume, through war, betrayal, or burial, would explain the silence that followed. There are even claims that the Yassa was not a single codified text, but a living system, constantly updated, flexible, and situational. What one Khan enforced, another might adjust. Could the Yassa have been more philosophy than law? A guiding spirit rather than a fixed document? And then there are the more elusive threads. Some researchers have pointed to cryptic references in Chinese yuan records, administrative documents written during Mongol rule in China. Certain bureaucratic practices and legal procedures suggest a deeper logic, one not fully explained by Confucian norms or earlier dynastic systems. Could fragments of the Yassa survive, buried beneath imperial ordinances and court verdicts? If so, they may be hiding in plain sight, coded not by secrecy, but by centuries of misinterpretation. Others believe the Yassa may yet lie buried, perhaps entombed with Genghis Khan himself. If, as some legends claim, his body was interred in a secret mountain valley along with sacred relics and documents, then the original Yassa may rest beside him, untouched, unread, and waiting. But how do we separate myth from memory? In the 20th and 21st centuries, archaeologists and historians have scoured the Mongolian steppe, mapping ancient trade routes, locating imperial camps, and even launching satellite searches for signs of lost burial sites. Yet the Yassa, if it ever had physical form, remains elusive. The more we search, the more the mystery deepens. Could the Yassa be more than a legal code, perhaps a symbol, a mythic idea used to project authority and inspire loyalty? Was its power not in its content, but in its inaccessibility? If no one could question its words, no one could challenge its rule. And yet, the consequences of the Yassa were real. It helped unify a diverse and often divided empire. It allowed for a postal system that stretched across continents. It protected religious minorities in ways unheard of in medieval Europe. It imposed a kind of order, however brutal, across lands previously fractured by tribal war and political instability. But without the document, we're left to reconstruct its essence through the eyes of those who lived under its shadow, through the fear of travelers, the admiration of diplomats, the fragmented accounts of historians who sensed that behind the Mongol thunderstorm was something deeper, an invisible law guiding every conquest. So we are left with a question. If the Yassa was indeed real, where did it go? Was it burned, buried, or merely forgotten? Or could it still exist, sealed away in some long-forgotten archive, waiting for the right eyes to rediscover it? The answer may lie beneath the dust of steppe and stone, or perhaps, as the Mongols intended, it lies only in silence. Across the rolling expanse of eastern Mongolia, where the land undulates like the surface of a forgotten sea, the wind carries voices older than any empire. In the twilight hours, when the sky turns violet and the steppe seems to breathe, shepherds still speak in hushed tones of a legend passed from fire to fire, from ancestor to child. A tale not of kings or conquests, but of origins. A tale of the blue wolf and the fallow doe. It is here, beneath the pale arc of the eternal blue sky, that the story begins. Not in the dust of a battlefield or the stone of a palace, but in myth. According to the oldest surviving Mongol chronicle, The Secret History of the Mongols, the first ancestors of Genghis Khan descended not from men, but from a celestial pairing, a blue wolf and a beautiful doe sent by heaven. Their union gave birth to a lineage that would one day rule the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen. At first glance, this seems no different from many ancient origin myths, a symbolic tale meant to inspire awe and establish divine legitimacy. But here, as in so many corners of Mongolian history, the line between fable and fact is not so easily drawn. Who or what was the blue wolf? Why did the chroniclers of the Mongol royal house place such emphasis on this story, even embedding it in the very foundation of their identity? And why does this legend persist with such emotional weight even now? Let us begin with the sources. The Secret History, composed in 1240 shortly after the death of Genghis Khan, is both a chronicle and an epic. In its opening lines, It describes how a blue wolf born with destiny from heaven and a fallow doe born with destiny from earth crossed the great ocean and settled at the banks of the Onon River. Their descendants became the Borjigin clan, Genghis Khan's own. The wording is spare but evocative. No motives are explained. No context is offered. The wolf and the doe simply are. Together they shape a bloodline blessed by the sky and rooted in the earth. In the animistic belief systems of the early Mongols, animals were not mere creatures. They were spirit guides, totems, and messengers of divine will. The wolf, in particular, held special significance. Revered for its strength, independence, and endurance, the wolf was seen as both a protector and a warrior. The fallow doe, by contrast, embodied gentleness, intuition, and harmony with the natural world. In uniting these opposites, the legend may represent the ideal balance of Mongol life, fierce in war, but attuned to the rhythms of land and sky. But beyond metaphor, some scholars have speculated that the legend conceals deeper historical clues. Could the blue wolf and the doe refer to real tribal symbols, totems of early Mongol or Proto-Mongolic clans? Several Central Asian tribes used animal emblems to designate lineage, authority, or spiritual patronage. The blue wolf may have been the totem of a leading warrior clan, while the doe might symbolize an allied matrilineal group. Their union, in this reading, would signal a historical alliance that laid the foundation for what would become the Mongol royal house. Others go further, suggesting a shamanic or cosmological interpretation. In ancient Mongol cosmology, blue was the color of heaven, the eternal, omnipresent sky god known as Tengri. A blue wolf, then, might not be an earthly creature at all, but a spirit being sent by Tengri to bring divine blood to earth. The doe, born of the earth itself, may symbolize humanity or nature, completing a sacred duality. This interpretation aligns with the Mongol belief in the Khans as chosen instruments of heaven, leaders whose right to rule was granted not by inheritance, but by cosmic order. Yet the mystery only deepens when we consider the geographical details of the legend. The wolf and doe are said to have crossed the Tengjis, often translated as the ocean or a great sea. But Mongolia is landlocked. There are no seas here, only rivers, lakes, and sky. Some scholars interpret the term metaphorically as a barrier between the spiritual and material worlds. Others suggest that Tengjis could have referred to Lake Baikal, or even a more ancient folk memory of a migration from Siberia or further west. Were the founders of the Mongol people once sea crossers, nomads from another world entirely? Still others ask, why this myth? Why was this origin story chosen, remembered, and protected through centuries of upheaval? It's worth noting that the blue wolf legend was not publicly celebrated during the height of the Mongol Empire. It was quietly preserved, perhaps even kept secret from non-Mongols. The secret history itself was originally written in Mongolian script, then hidden and later transcribed into Chinese for safekeeping. It was only rediscovered and translated centuries later. Was the legend considered too sacred to share? Or did its symbolic truth hold a power that even Genghis Khan's heirs feared to expose? The blue wolf and the doe are never seen again in Mongol literature. They vanish after the first paragraph, replaced by real historical figures, warriors, leaders, and conquerors. But their presence lingers, like the first breath before a storm. Today, some researchers wonder if deeper meanings remain undiscovered. Could archaeological finds, burial artifacts, ancient symbols, cave paintings contain forgotten echoes of the wolf and doe? Could forgotten oral traditions still held by reindeer herders, forest shamans, or isolated nomadic families hold missing pieces of the myth? Or was the entire story deliberately encoded, crafted not to be understood by all, but preserved for those with the eyes to see? What if the legend is more than a cultural touchstone? What if it is a cipher, a message left for the future? And so, as we gaze out across the endless steppe, its grasses whispering secrets to the wind, we are left with a question not of history, but of identity. Who were the Mongols before they became conquerors? And in the long-forgotten dance of the blue wolf and the doe, what truths still lie hidden beneath the hooves of time? The winds of the steppe do not rest. They coil across the empty plains of Mongolia like whispers from another age, brushing over stones, stirring old grass, and rattling through the bones of abandoned camps. In the silence between gusts, there are stories, fragments of memory carried by time itself. Among them is one of the most enduring and most unsettling, the legend of the Sulda, the sacred banner of Genghis Khan. To the untrained eye, it would seem an ordinary object, long since lost, spoken of only in echoes. A bundle of horsehair lashed to a spear shaft, it stood taller than a man and bore neither paint nor symbol. Yet it inspired terror in enemies and devotion in the hearts of Mongol warriors. The Sulda, or spirit banner, was no mere standard. It was believed to embody the very soul of the Khan, a living totem of power, protection, and, perhaps, curse. According to tradition, the Sulda was made from the tail hairs of Genghis Khan's prized white war horses. These horses, considered sacred, were kept apart from the rest, never ridden but honored, as their spirits were thought to dwell closest to heaven. When the banner was raised, it was not simply a call to battle, it was a call to destiny. But where is this banner now? That is the mystery. Following the death of Genghis Khan in 1227, the Sulda was enshrined and guarded with solemn reverence. Mongol chronicles hint that it was placed in a secret sanctuary, far from the reach of enemies and even distant descendants. It was said to be attended by hereditary custodians who offered sacrifices and prayers to keep its spirit content. Yet somewhere along the march of centuries, the trail vanishes. Was the banner destroyed, hidden away, or did it vanish by other means? For many, the disappearance of the Sulda is inseparable from the decline of the Mongol Empire itself. As the empire fractured in the generations after Genghis Khan, so too did the unity of its spirit. The Yassa, the secret law, was ignored. Successors turned on one another, and the power that once commanded the known world began to erode. Some Mongol shamans whispered that the Sulda had grown angry, that it had not been properly honored, that its spirit had become restless. Could a simple object, even a symbolic one, truly carry the fate of an empire? In modern times, attempts to locate the original banner have been few and inconclusive. No known museum or archive claims to possess it. Mongolian nationalists and scholars alike have searched for it in sacred mountains, ancient burial sites, and remote temple ruins, but it has never been found. And yet, strange stories persist. In the early 20th century, amid the turbulence of revolution and war, there were claims that fragments of an ancient Mongol standard, made from braided white horsehair, were discovered in a remote monastery near the Kentiai Mountains, the very region said to house Genghis Khan's hidden tomb. Monks reportedly kept the artifact in a dark chamber and refused to let it be touched. When Soviet agents attempted to remove it in the 1930s, the monastery burned to the ground under mysterious circumstances. No photos, no remains, no proof, only rumors. Others point to the so-called Black Sulda, a related banner associated with wartime and vengeance, constructed from black horsehair instead of white. In some tales, Genghis Khan possessed both, the white for peace, the black for war. Could one of these have survived under another name, perhaps misidentified, forgotten in a dusty storeroom or private collection? More mystifying still is the aura that clings to the legend. In some retellings, the Sulda was not just a relic, but a force. Those who approached it without reverence fell ill or vanished. Some versions describe it glowing with an otherworldly light during battle. Others say it spoke, not in words, but in wind. Was it ever just a banner? Or something older and stranger? And what of the so-called curse? While the Sulda was a symbol of power for the Mongols, it may have represented danger for others. Some medieval Islamic chroniclers described the Mongol banners as demonic in appearance and noted that they were never captured, only destroyed or lost. One chilling account from the fall of Baghdad in 1258 suggests that a standard resembling the Sulda was seen flapping violently in still air moments before the city was overrun. Could the banner have been more than a symbol? Could it have carried with it something darker, something that outlived even the Khans? Modern historians are cautious. They remind us that oral tradition tends to embellish, that relics are often mythologized, and that objects like the Sulda, however powerful in story, were tools of psychological warfare. And yet, even they admit, no concrete evidence has surfaced to explain the fate of the banner. Not a shard of its shaft, not a strand of its sacred tail hair. And so the legend lives on. In 2006, the Mongolian government sanctioned the creation of a new Sulda, a ceremonial replica, to honor the spirit of Genghis Khan. It was paraded before crowds and hailed as a cultural resurrection. But for many, it was only a shadow. The true Sulda remains hidden. Or perhaps it is waiting for the right moment, waiting for the right heir, or waiting to be found again by those who still believe that power can be bound in horsehair and silence. So we must ask, is the banner gone or merely lost? And if it were to return, what would follow in its wake? The wind shifts, curling upward through the jagged ridges of Mongolia's Khenti Mountains, an ancient range wrapped in fog and legend. Pines creak softly under gray skies, and a low mist clings to the slopes like a veil. Here, in the northeastern reaches of the land once ruled by the greatest conqueror in history, the earth feels different, quieter, more watchful, as if something sleeps beneath it, undisturbed for centuries. It is said that this is not just a mountain range, but a sanctuary, a living monument, and somewhere deep within its folds lies a mountain that does not appear on modern maps, a mountain said to hold the soul of Genghis Khan. Since the day of his death in 1227, the exact location of Genghis Khan's tomb has remained one of history's most enduring secrets. Despite being one of the most documented figures of the medieval world, no verifiable trace of his burial site has ever been found. But within Mongolian oral tradition, one name emerges again and again: Burkhan Khaldun. Nestled in the Khenti wilderness, Burkhan Khaldun is revered as the most sacred mountain in Mongolia. Genghis Khan himself is believed to have prayed there, seeking guidance from the eternal blue sky. Tengri, the supreme god of the Mongol steppe. According to the secret history of the Mongols, this mountain offered refuge to the young Temujin during his years of exile and survival. He vowed to honor it forever. Some believe he returned there in death, but the mystery runs deeper than simple geography. In the years following the Great Khan's passing, a veil of silence descended over the details of his burial. According to legend, the funeral escort killed every witness encountered on their route to the burial site to preserve its secrecy. The soldiers who buried him were then reportedly executed themselves. Some say a river was diverted to flow over the grave. Others claim forests were planted to hide the site entirely. Over time, Stories of a forbidden mountain began to circulate, one no outsider could reach, one that even locals refused to climb. Could this be Burkhan Khaldun? Or is it something else entirely? What if there is another mountain, one deliberately hidden from the world? Some Mongolian shamans and historians speak of a lost mountain deeper in the Kentai wilderness, unrecorded and unnamed, said to guard the Khan's essence. Unlike Burkhan Khaldun, which is now accessible and protected as a national treasure, this other mountain, if it exists, remains untouched by tourists, archaeologists, or even satellites. In the late 1990s, a classified Soviet-era military map reportedly showed an unmarked, restricted zone within Kentai province. Former intelligence personnel have hinted at rumors of unusual surveillance patterns over the area, areas no longer associated with any strategic value. Why would a remote, uninhabited stretch of forest and hills warrant such secrecy? And who, if anyone, still guards it? Of course, there are rational explanations. Soviet cartography was notoriously incomplete in remote regions. Restricted zones were often used for missile testing or covert research, but these reasons fail to satisfy those who have heard the old tales. The ones passed from herder to herder around campfires long before the Soviets arrived. In these accounts, the mountain is not merely a burial site, it is a spiritual vault, a place where Genghis Khan's soul is bound to the land, protected by ancient rites and ancestral forces. No tombstone marks it, no monument rises above it, but the mountain itself, they say, lives with his spirit. Disturbing it would bring misfortune, not only to those who trespass, but to the world itself. Could this be why the tomb has never been officially sought with modern tools? Over the years, archaeological teams from around the globe have expressed interest in locating Genghis Khan's final resting place. Some have used drones, satellite imagery, even ground-penetrating radar. But Mongolia's government has remained cautious, often declining excavation permits near sacred lands. Many believe that the mystery is better left untouched, not from fear of curses, but out of deep respect. Still, small clues continue to surface. In 2001, a Japanese Mongolian expedition unearthed artifacts near the Onan River basin, ceremonial items dated to the early 13th century. Some speculated they were related to the royal court of the Khan. Others dismissed them as unrelated. But the location, just miles from the base of Burkhan Khaldun, reignited whispers that something might still be hidden there, beneath layers of soil and secrecy. Then there are the satellite anomalies. In 2010, open-source investigators claim to have identified a perfectly symmetrical clearing, roughly rectangular, in the Kentai forests. The area had no roads, no nearby habitation, and appeared completely inaccessible by vehicle. The image went viral among amateur historians. Was it a natural formation, a forest anomaly, or was it an overgrown, ancient structure long forgotten by time? Experts caution against drawing conclusions. Nature, after all, produces its own mysteries. But once again, the question returns. If a sacred mountain truly guards Genghis Khan's soul, what else might lie buried beneath it? What secrets were sealed into the earth nearly 800 years ago? And how close, how very close, might we be to standing upon them without even knowing? The steppe keeps its silence. The wind continues to move, and somewhere, perhaps on a mountain untouched by cartographers and cloaked by myth, the great Khan may still be watching. So we ask, is the sacred mountain lost or deliberately hidden? And if it were ever found, would the world be ready for what lies beneath its ancient stones? And as we drift from the whispering peaks said to cradle the soul of the Khan, the mystery descends with us, down into the heart of the Mongol world. Here, far from the sacred mountain's silence, once stood a city that pulsed with the power of an empire, and now barely speaks at all, Nestled in the sweeping Orkhon Valley of central Mongolia, surrounded by green steppe that undulates like waves beneath an endless sky, lie the scattered bones of what was once the beating center of the largest contiguous empire the world has ever known, Karakorum. Today, it appears unassuming, a patchwork of low ruins, grassy mounds, and weathered stone. A few carved turtle statues, half buried in the earth, sit solemnly where grand walls once rose. The modern town of Karakorum, nearby, bears a name that echoes its legendary predecessor. But the true extent, the full layout, and the inner workings of ancient Karakorum remain elusive. How could the imperial capital of the Mongol Empire, a place described in vivid terms by travelers like William of Rubruck and Marco Polo, vanish into such obscurity? What secrets still lie beneath the soil, unseen, undocumented, and unexplained? The historical record gives us only glimpses. Founded by Ögedei Khan, the son of Genghis Khan, in the 1230s, Karakorum quickly rose from a nomadic encampment to an administrative and symbolic hub. Built near an ancient trade route, the city became the crossroads of cultures, where Chinese artisans, Persian merchants, Russian craftsmen, and European envoys mingled freely. Stone was brought from afar. Craftsmen erected palaces, temples, and government halls. Rubruck, a Flemish Franciscan envoy who visited in 1254, wrote of a city filled with religious diversity, a mosque, a Buddhist temple, a Christian church, and countless dwellings. He described a silver fountain in the form of a tree designed by a French goldsmith from which flowed wine, mead, and fermented mare's milk. Yet despite such striking descriptions, no complete map, blueprint, or written record of Karakorum's original layout has survived. Archaeological digs over the past century have uncovered fragments, stone foundations, ceramic shards, signs of smelting kilns, and fragments of brick walls. But what's missing is coherence. A unifying plan, an official design, a clear understanding of how this city truly functioned. Was it tightly organized or sprawling and organic? Did its structure mirror that of a traditional Chinese capital, or did it follow a nomadic, modular logic? Or was it something else entirely? Could Karakorum have been intentionally ephemeral, designed to fade? Some scholars have speculated that, unlike the permanent cities of other empires, the Mongol capital may have retained elements of mobility. Tents and wooden structures could have comprised much of the city, leaving only scattered stone remnants behind. This would reflect the Mongol worldview: impermanence, motion, and adaptation. But then, why the stone sculptures? The inscriptions? The intricate tile work that's been found? There are stranger possibilities, too. Some suggest that the full city we think of as Karakorum may have never been confined to a single location. Instead, it may have shifted with the seasons, expanding or relocating depending on climate, political needs, or spiritual rituals. What we've called the capital may have been more of a living network, an evolving idea rather than a fixed place. Others go further. Among fringe theories, there are whispers of hidden subterranean chambers, perhaps built to protect valuable archives, maps, or relics from being looted by enemies like the Ming dynasty or later conquerors. These chambers, it is claimed, were designed to collapse upon intrusion, or to remain sealed unless opened with specific ritual knowledge passed down through priesthoods now lost. There are local legends that speak of a ghost city beneath the ground, visible only under certain stars, when the winds shift just right. Mongolian shamans have pointed to unusual energy patterns in the Orkhon Valley, areas where animals refuse to graze and compasses falter. Mere superstition? Or signs of something yet undiscovered? Intriguingly, while modern archaeology has made strides, particularly through German-Mongolian collaborations and advanced imaging technology, many zones within the old capital remain unexcavated. In part, this is due to budget and terrain, but in other cases, the hesitation is deliberate. Out of respect for the land's spiritual importance, some areas are left untouched, much like the rumored tomb of Genghis Khan. Karakorum, after all, is not just a ruin. It's a memory made sacred by time. Digging too deep risks disturbing more than earth. Even the famed Erdene Zoo monastery, built in the 16th century atop or near the original city's foundations, poses a historical puzzle. Did its builders incorporate materials from the lost capital? Do its subterranean layers conceal older structures? Despite centuries of rebuilding and political upheaval, the site still pulses with mystery. And perhaps most haunting of all is the absence of anything that might resemble a central palace or throne room. Was it destroyed? Or was there never one to begin with? Could it be that Genghis Khan and his successors, despite their unmatched military dominance, chose to keep their centers humble, to reject the trappings of sedentary power and rule from a city that reflected their nomadic soul? Or is it possible that we've simply missed it? That Karakorum's true heart remains buried, waiting for the right eyes to find it? The soil is patient. It forgets nothing. And somewhere beneath this silent plain, where eagles circle high and the wind hums ancient names, the city still breathes, its story incomplete, its design undecoded. We are left with fragments, broken tiles, crumbling inscriptions, half-drawn maps, each piece a whisper. Together, they hint at something vast, sophisticated, and strangely concealed. So the question remains, was Karakorum truly lost to time? Or was it built to disappear, just like the soul it once served? And while the ruins of Karakorum remain quiet in the Mongolian steppe, veiled in their mystery and sacred restraint, another silence echoes far to the west. This one not born of time, but of terror. A silence carved by fire, dust, and deliberate forgetting. A silence that once had a name, Nishapur. Beneath the sun-scorched plains of northeastern Iran, just south of the Kopet Dagh Mountains, lies the ancient city of Nishapur, once a jewel of the Islamic Golden Age, a center of poetry, science, and commerce, nestled at the crossroads of the Silk Road. Today, its remnants lie quietly under layers of earth and rubble, scattered across dusty archaeological mounds. The wind that sweeps through the site carries more than sand. It carries absence. In April of 1221, according to most accounts, Nishapur ceased to exist. What happened here is recorded in the pages of medieval Persian chronicles, at least in fragments. The Mongols, in pursuit of revenge, are said to have annihilated the city in an act so total, so methodical, that it has remained a grim emblem of destruction for centuries. It is one of the bloodiest sieges in recorded history. But here lies the puzzle. While the annihilation of Nishapur is accepted as fact, the exact scale, motives, and aftermath remain shrouded in layers of contradiction, emotion, and historical gaps. What truly happened in Nishapur? And why do so many of its records appear to have been lost or suppressed? Mainstream historians point to a single catalyst, the death of Kokochu, a Mongol commander and son-in-law of Genghis Khan, reportedly slain by a Nishapuri archer during an uprising after the city had initially surrendered. According to some sources, Genghis Khan's daughter, Kokochu's widow, demanded vengeance, and the Khan gave the order. What followed was a massacre. Estimates of the death toll vary wildly, ranging from 100,000 to over 1 million. Entire families were wiped out. Buildings were razed. Scholars, artists, and merchants who once filled the city were eradicated. Some say even cats and dogs were slaughtered. But these numbers raise questions. How could a medieval army, even one as efficient as the Mongols, kill with such totality in such a short time? Were the records inflated by horrified survivors? Or were later historians exaggerating for moral or poetic effect? More intriguing still is the lack of primary Mongol documentation. The Mongols were known for record-keeping. Spies, emissaries, and scribes followed them everywhere. Yet in this case, the official Mongol chronicles, like the secret history of the Mongols, barely mention Nishapur's destruction at all. Why would an act so dramatic be omitted or downplayed? Was it seen as a shameful deviation from Genghis Khan's usual policy of conditional mercy? Some speculate that the silence points to internal dissent, that perhaps the massacre wasn't authorized by the Khan himself, but by a vengeful family member acting in his name. Others suggest the violence was so extreme that later Mongol leaders, especially those eager to build diplomatic ties with Persia and the Islamic world, chose to bury the event, both metaphorically and literally. Among more speculative theories lies the notion of deliberate erasure, that records of Nishapur were not merely lost to time, but systematically destroyed to hide something deeper, an incident, a betrayal, a relic, or a revelation considered too dangerous or damning to preserve. What might that have been? Some fringe theorists have suggested that Nishapur was not just a cultural hub, but the custodian of ancient pre-Islamic texts and esoteric knowledge, documents the Mongols either sought to seize or obliterate. Others claim the city harbored powerful secret societies that had influence stretching far beyond its walls. There is no definitive proof of such claims, but the idea persists, in part because of how little survives. Where other great cities, like Baghdad, Samarkand, or Bukhara, left behind scrolls, libraries, tombs, or ruins to tell their stories, Nishapur seems to vanish into a gaping hole in the record. Even contemporary Islamic historians, who wrote extensively about the Mongol invasions, often treat the event with brevity or vague sorrow. It's as if the city was not just destroyed, but unwritten. Even physical excavations offer few clues. While Nishapur has been excavated periodically since the 20th century, especially by teams from the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Iranian archaeologists, many areas remain untouched, and the layers from the 13th century are oddly sterile. Much of what's found comes from earlier eras, Sasanian, Seljuk, and early Islamic periods. Could the Mongols have burned the city so completely that even its ruins lost their voice? Or were other hands at work in the centuries that followed, scrubbing away memories that some preferred not to confront? There are oral traditions, passed down in hushed tones by locals near modern-day Nishapur, that speak of a darkness, of spirits unearthed, of a curse that lingers in the soil. Elders say the land was salted, that nothing has grown properly on certain fields since the massacre. Folklore, perhaps, or echoes of something real. And still the question hangs in the dry desert air. What was so important in Nishapur that its destruction had to be absolute, and its memory silenced? Could it be that Nishapur was simply a victim of cold vengeance? Or was it the setting of a deeper, hidden confrontation between empire and resistance, dogma and knowledge, conquest and truth? The wind still blows over the ruins. Sand fills what were once streets. Bones, when found, are brittle and unmarked, mute testimonies to a day the world was meant to forget. But the past never forgets. It waits. And so we are left with uncertainty, a city once alive with music and math, wiped out in a week and buried beneath a silence too deep to ignore. What else might lie beneath the earth? What truths still wait to be unearthed, not just by archaeologists, but by those willing to look where history has drawn a curtain? In the case of Nishapur, perhaps the greatest mystery is not what was destroyed, but what we were never meant to find. And while Nishapur's fate was sealed in blood and silence, shaped by forces visible and brutal, the next thread in this tapestry of Mongol enigmas takes us into the realm of the invisible. the world behind the world, where power is whispered through smoke, trance, and wind. Here, we meet a figure less known but perhaps more mysterious than any warlord or conqueror. His name was Kokochu. The Mongolian steppe stretches endlessly under a gray dawn sky. The grass, still wet with dew, sways like a sea in slow motion. Out here, everything seems still. Yet something stirs beneath the surface. The land hums. The sky feels watchful. It is here, in this liminal space between silence and wind, that the shamans of the Mongol world once walked, mediators between spirit and man, between destiny and decision. And among them, one stands apart, Kokochu, also known as Teb-Tengeri, a name meaning heavenly spirit or spirit of the sky. He was no mere healer or tribal mystic. According to scattered sources, most notably the Secret History of the Mongols, Kokochu was a spiritual advisor to Genghis Khan himself. But his true role remains elusive, hovering in the background of history like incense smoke dissipating just beyond reach. Why was this shaman so powerful? And why does he vanish from the record so abruptly? Mainstream history records that Kokochu was born into the same broad tribal confederation as Temujin, the future Genghis Khan, and rose to prominence as a spiritual authority during the early stages of Mongol unification. Described as enigmatic and persuasive, Kokochu is said to have dreamed visions, interpreted omens, and played a role in declaring Temujin's divine right to rule. Some believe it was Kokochu who first invoked Tengri, the sky god of Mongol religion, to proclaim Temujin the destined ruler of all the tribes. In this sense, Kokochu may not have merely supported Genghis Khan's rise. He may have helped engineer it, not through weapons, but through myth and legitimacy. But here the record begins to blur. The secret history suggests that Kokochu began to overstep. He allegedly used his position to influence decisions beyond the spiritual realm, interfering in political matters, accusing rivals of treason, and consolidating influence in ways that made even the Khan's generals uneasy. Some historians interpret this as a power struggle between the shamanic class and the military elite, a tension that reached its breaking point when Kokochu accused Temujin's own blood brother, Ögedei, of plotting rebellion. Temujin, known for his careful balancing of loyalty and fear, is said to have hesitated. But Ögedei struck first. According to one version of the tale, he broke Kokochu's back, either in a duel or as punishment, effectively ending the shaman's influence forever. And yet, questions remain. Why was Kokochu's downfall so sudden, so decisive? Why does such a pivotal spiritual figure receive so little mention in Mongol histories thereafter? Some speculate that Kokochu's true role was more profound and more dangerous than the surviving texts reveal. Could it be that Kokochu wasn't merely a political meddler, but a guardian of sacred rites or ancient knowledge that predated even Mongol tribal memory? That he carried secrets about the stars, the ancestors, the sacred mountains, secrets not meant to fall into political hands? Others propose that Kokochu's influence over Temujin may have bordered on spiritual manipulation, that the shaman did not simply guide the Khan, but controlled him through rituals and dreams. Was Genghis Khan, in those early days, more puppet than sovereign? Still others whisper of darker things. In some oral traditions, rarely written down, Kokochu is remembered not as a mere priest, but as a Kar Chotgur, a dark spirit worker who trafficked with restless souls, performing rites that bordered on necromancy. These stories speak of him summoning winds to kill, speaking with the dead, or even binding spirits into objects, amulets, staffs, or stones hidden in the steppe. Is it coincidence that after his death, Genghis Khan began to shift away from tribal religion, relying more on law, structure, and divine authority than shamanic insight? Was Kokochu the last barrier between empire and ideology? between a ruler guided by the spirit world and one who claimed the heavens for himself. The shaman's disappearance from history is too clean, too complete. His death is recorded. But what happened to his tools, his ritual drum, his carved idols, his written spells, if he had any? Mongol shamans were known to pass on sacred items from one generation to the next. Yet nothing of Kokochu remains. No shrine, no grave, no legacy in the open. Could those artifacts still lie buried somewhere in Mongolia's vast expanse, hidden in a cairn, or swallowed by the roots of the forested Kangai Mountains? Or were they deliberately destroyed, wiped out by a rising power that feared what they represented? And yet Kokochu has never truly disappeared. His name returns again and again, whispered in the shadows of Mongol legend. Some modern shamans in Inner Mongolia and Siberia still invoke Teb Tengeri in their rites, not as a man, but as a spirit who still walks between worlds. He is not gone. He has only shifted. And so we are left to wonder, who was Kokochu, really? A manipulative mystic consumed by power, a guardian of ancient, forgotten wisdom, a prophet whose voice was silenced to clear the path for empire? Or something stranger still, something that doesn't fit neatly into the categories of faith or history? As the wind sighs across the plains and the fire crackles in the hearth of a distant yurt, the old ways are remembered, even if the world pretends they are gone. In the vast open silence of the steppe, one question lingers like a distant drumbeat. What did Kokochu know that the world was not ready to remember? Even as the last echoes of Kokochu's whispered rites fade into the winds of the steppe, another mystery rises, quieter, broader, yet no less profound. If Genghis Khan's soul rests somewhere unknown, guarded by mountains and spirits, what became of the bloodline he left behind? A lineage said to stretch from the plains of Mongolia to the palaces of Europe, and perhaps, some say, even farther still. The Orkhon Valley lies silent in the early morning mist. Wind brushes over scattered stones, once part of imperial roads, now reclaimed by time. There is no fanfare here, no monuments grand enough to match the shadow cast by a single name: Genghis Khan. He was a conqueror who reshaped continents, a man who at the height of his power controlled more land than any other in recorded history. His legacy is carved in the ruins of cities razed and rebuilt, in laws imposed across civilizations, and, most enduringly, in blood. It is estimated that 1 in 200 men alive today carry the genetic signature of a single male ancestor believed to be Genghis Khan. That's nearly 16 million men, bound by a strand of Y chromosomal inheritance. But beyond DNA, beyond legend, what became of his direct descendants? The Mongol Empire, upon Genghis Khan's death in 1227, was divided among his sons and grandsons. Names like Ögedei, Tolui, Batu, and Kublai still appear in textbooks. They ruled vast territories, from the Russian steppes to the Chinese heartland. For a time it seemed the Borjigin lineage, the house of Genghis, would endure eternally. But history's pages grow faint where certainty meets obscurity. Ögedei, named his successor, expanded the empire, but died suddenly. Kublai Khan, arguably the most famous descendant, ruled China under the Yuan dynasty, yet his reign marked the beginning of fragmentation. One by one, the 4 great khanates splintered. Some fell to local uprisings, others to internal power struggles. By the 14th century, the Mongol Empire had unraveled, and with it, the visibility of Genghis Khan's bloodline began to vanish. Mainstream historians chart the descent of these rulers into smaller dynasties, Timurids, Ilkhanids, and the Chagatai line. But most of these branches were either absorbed into new ethnic identities or faded into obscurity. The later Khans ruled in name only, often puppets of local warlords or assimilated nobility. Yet, here the mystery deepens. Some descendants retained power longer than is widely known. In Central Asia, a line of Khans claiming descent from Genghis ruled the Khanate of Khiva until the 19th century. The Mughal emperors of India, from Babur to Aurangzeb, also claimed descent, through Genghis Khan's son Chagatai and through Timur. Their empire survived until British colonial rule. But what of the others? What of the unrecorded, the forgotten, and the deliberately erased? Certain Central Asian oral histories speak of Borjigin descendants who chose exile over submission, fleeing into the Siberian taiga, the Tibetan plateau, and even the highlands of Iran. In these tales, they became wanderers, mystics, and shepherd kings. One legend tells of a clan that carries the wolf seal, a signet said to be passed from Genghis himself, hidden for centuries, waiting to be reclaimed by a rightful heir. Other stories claim the descendants were hunted down. As the Mongol Empire's image shifted, from empire to oppressor, from unifier to invader, local rulers may have seen Borjigin heirs as threats to be eliminated. Could it be that some were systematically purged, their names stripped from family trees, their graves left unmarked? And what of Europe? There are rumors, never confirmed, that some Mongol princes, through war, captivity, or diplomacy, intermarried into noble houses in Hungary, Poland, and even France. A 14th century Italian manuscript makes passing mention of a dark-eyed prince from the east who fathered a line of minor lords in Lombardy. Another obscure Russian chronicle alludes to a Tatar emissary who settled permanently near Novgorod, founding a family line still bearing cryptic steppe symbols in their crest. Is it fantasy, or fragments of a forgotten truth? In 2003, a genetic study stunned the world. Researchers traced a specific Y chromosome lineage across a swath of Asia, from Mongolia to the Caspian Sea. The signature was too concentrated and too ancient to be coincidence. They concluded it likely belonged to a single man who lived around the time of Genghis Khan. All signs pointed toward him or one of his immediate male line descendants. But the study didn't name names. It couldn't, because the identities of many of those descendants are unknown, and perhaps that is by design. Some Mongol chroniclers believed that the true heirs of Genghis would only return in times of great crisis when the world again needed unifying force. Could this idea, part prophecy, part cultural longing, have led families to conceal their ancestry, passing it down in secret until the stars once again aligned? There are families in Mongolia today, quiet, unassuming, who believe they carry that ancient blood. Their names are not known outside the steppe. They speak not of empire, but of obligation. They say the world is not ready to know them, and in the dusty archives of Lhasa, Bukhara, or perhaps even Vatican vaults, might there lie a sealed scroll, a family tree, a letter, the key to restoring the missing links of Genghis Khan's lineage? For if we know where the man lies not buried, if we know that his tomb was hidden, his soul guarded by mountains, and his banner feared as cursed, is it not possible that his bloodline too was protected, kept from the world not to preserve them, but to preserve us? In an age of DNA tests and digital ancestry, the question looms larger than ever. What if Genghis Khan's true heirs still walk among us, watching, waiting, remembering? As the fate of Genghis Khan's bloodline fades into quiet uncertainty, one name rises from the shadows of succession: Ögedei Khan. The second great Khan of the Mongol Empire, chosen by Genghis himself, crowned by ritual and decree. Yet just as his power seemed poised to cement a dynasty, Ögedei's life came to a sudden and mysterious halt. His death, recorded in passing by scribes, left more questions than answers. What truly happened on that winter night in 1241? And why does the silence surrounding it still echo so loudly? The winds howl across the stone remnants of the once grand capital, Karakorum. Snow gathers in the corners of the ruined palace walls, walls that may have once heard the last breaths of an emperor. Here, in this remote Mongolian steppe, Ögedei Khan ruled at the height of an empire that stretched from Korea to Hungary. A unifier, a builder, a man whose ambitions mirrored his father's, but whose fate deviated dramatically. According to traditional accounts, Ögedei died suddenly at the age of 56. Some sources say he simply drank himself to death, an unfortunate but common habit among the Mongol elite. Chroniclers like Rashid al-Din and Juvaini attribute his demise to excess and indulgence. But is it truly that simple? This explanation, repeated over centuries, lacks detail. Where were his personal physicians? Why were there no elaborate mourning rituals recorded as befitted a Khan? Why did his death, in the middle of a victorious campaign in Europe, bring not just grief, but a sudden halt to the Mongol advance? Ögedei's death occurred just weeks after the decisive Mongol victory at the Battle of Mohi in Hungary. Europe, fractured and vulnerable, stood open before the Mongol horde. But then, inexplicably, the armies retreated. Batu Khan, who had crushed the Hungarian forces, turned back east. The campaign ended, not in defeat, but in departure. Why? The traditional reason, the death of the great Khan, required all Mongol leaders to return home for the Kurultai, a grand council to elect a new ruler, a sacred obligation. But this alone feels curiously inadequate. The Mongols had conquered vast lands without hesitation or interruption before. Why stop now when the continent lay defenseless? Could Ögedei's death have been more than natural? Could it have been premeditated? Some historians suggest that court politics may have played a darker role. Though Genghis Khan had named Ögedei his heir, the internal rivalries among his descendants ran deep. Tolui, Ögedei's brother, was popular among the military and considered a strong alternative, but Tolui had died under suspicious circumstances years earlier after reportedly performing a shamanic ritual to save Ögedei's life. According to some Mongol accounts, Tolui drank a cursed potion in a ritual sacrifice to transfer illness from his brother to himself. A symbolic tale? Or coded political allegory? What if Ögedei's court, composed of generals, advisors, and competing royal wives, held secrets not preserved in the official record? His wife, Toragane Khatun, took control after his death and delayed the election of a new great Khan for years. In that time, she ruled as regent with significant autonomy, placing her sons and allies in key positions. Could she have gained from Ögedei's demise? Was it coincidence that her son, Guyuk, was the next to rise to power? Whispers persist of poison, not administered in malice, but in quiet ambition. Some suggest that a slow-acting toxin was slipped into Ögedei's drink, disguised within his heavy daily consumption of alcohol. Others propose a fatal misstep in traditional medicine, a mistaken dosage of herbal sedatives used to ease his growing ailments. One rare manuscript from the Yuan era hints that Ögedei had grown paranoid in his final years, suffering from insomnia and visions. He had reportedly banished several court advisors and dismissed astrologers who warned of a dark alignment in the stars. Could his mental state have played a role in a breakdown, or been an excuse crafted to cover up a deeper scheme? Even more curious is the abrupt suppression of documents from this period. Imperial Mongol archives from Ögedei's reign are far fewer in number compared to other rulers. Entire chapters in the secret history of the Mongols are missing or redacted when it comes to his death. Did someone ensure that whatever happened remained hidden? Archaeologically, no confirmed burial site has been found. Like his father before him, Ögedei's final resting place was kept secret. Some believe he was buried near Burkhan Khaldun, the sacred mountain of his ancestors. Others suggest a distant valley beyond the Khenti range, shrouded in pine and guarded by descendants of the ancient imperial protectors. No markers, no monuments. And what of the timing? Ögedei's death didn't just stop the Mongol conquest of Europe, it preserved Western civilization as we know it. Had the Mongols continued, they could have easily swept into Italy, France, perhaps even to the Atlantic. Did some unseen force intervene? A natural death? A power play within the Mongol elite? Or more speculatively, was Ögedei's death aided or arranged by foreign agents? It is not entirely implausible. Intelligence networks existed, even in the 13th century. The threat of Mongol domination was clear. Could local rulers have found a way to strike not on the battlefield, but from within? Of course, this veers into speculation. There is no proof, only questions. No confessions, only gaps. But perhaps that is where the mystery lies. In the stillness. In the lack of a clear answer. A great Khan, riding high on victory, brought down by what seems to be a quiet, unremarkable end. No final decree. No dying words. Just absence. What truly silenced Ögedei Khan? Was it time? Was it ambition? Was it fate? Or, as some Mongolian elders say in hushed tones, was it the will of the eternal blue sky, the unseen force that raised the Mongol Empire, and, when its course was run, began to quietly unmake it? The steppe remembers, but it does not always speak, and somewhere, beneath the snow-covered ruins of Karakorum, the truth may still be waiting. As the echoes of Ögedei's death faded across the Mongolian steppe, and the empire's fate hung delicately in the hands of rival factions, an unexpected figure began to shape its future, not with a sword, but through something far more subtle and far more enduring. Among the windswept hills of northern Mongolia, not far from the ghostly outlines of Karakorum, ancient legends still linger. The air is thin, the grass is dry, and the sky stretches in every direction, endless, blue, watching. In this vast, open landscape where warriors once thundered on horseback, there existed another kind of influence, one that moved not through conquest, but through quiet precision. At the center of it stood a woman, Sorghaghtani Beki, a princess of the Karakorum tribe, a daughter-in-law of Genghis Khan, a devout Christian in a world of shamans and conquerors, but also, perhaps, the most politically skilled and enigmatic woman in the entire Mongol Empire. While the world remembers the thunder of Mongol hooves and the fire of siege engines, Sorghaghtani's legacy rides silently beneath it all. How did she rise to such influence in a male-dominated world? And why does her name appear so often between the lines? Never in the center, but always close to the heart of change? We know this. After the death of her husband, Tolui, the youngest and most favored son of Genghis Khan, Sorghaghtani did not retreat into mourning. Instead, she raised their 4 sons with remarkable foresight: Mongke, Hulagu, Kublai, and Arik Boke. Each of them would go on to shape empires. 2 would become great Khans. One would found the Yuan dynasty in China. Another would bring Persian culture to the heart of the Mongol elite. Their rise was not a coincidence. It was strategy. According to surviving Persian and Chinese accounts, Sorghaghtani was wise, modest, and politically astute. She declined marriage proposals after Tolui's death, opting instead to maintain her independence, a rare and dangerous choice. She governed her own territories, managed trade, negotiated with foreign leaders, and even consulted religious figures of many faiths, including Nestorian Christians, Muslims, and Buddhists. A diplomat, a matriarch. But was she also a quiet kingmaker? Some historians believe she orchestrated the eventual rise of her eldest son, Mongke, to the throne of the Great Khan, over other, more obvious candidates. The secret history of the Mongols remains notably silent on her direct actions, but Persian chroniclers like Juvaini and Rashid al-Din describe her as the most intelligent woman among the Mongols, attributing her with an influence few dared to challenge. When power seemed fragmented and uncertain, it was Sorghaghtani who bridged the clans, who whispered in the right ears, who made alliances that outlived armies. And yet, her story remains curiously fragmented. Why are her actions during the crucial years of succession after Ögedei's death only sparsely detailed in Mongol sources? Why do imperial Chinese records offer more praise than her own native chronicles? Some speculate that Sorghaghtani operated deliberately from the shadows, ensuring her son's futures by avoiding the spotlight herself. Others believe her erasure may have been intentional, perhaps by rivals uncomfortable with the scope of her authority. Still others point to her Karaite heritage. The Karaites, though initially enemies of Genghis Khan, later allied through marriage. But they also carried deep-rooted traditions of prophecy, spiritual vision, and esoteric power. Could Sorghaghtani have inherited not only political instinct, but a cultural lineage of subtle manipulation, of seeing beyond the present moment? Then there is her faith. A devout Nestorian Christian, Sorghaghtani supported churches, built alliances with Christian minorities across Central Asia, and opened dialogue with European emissaries. Some even say she saw her son's rule as part of a divine mission, an attempt to create a world empire under a universal moral law. Could her decisions have been guided not only by family ambition, but by a larger spiritual purpose? Fringe theories go further. A few writers, mostly in apocryphal or fringe Mongol manuscripts, suggest Sorghaghtani had access to sacred texts smuggled from the West, that she corresponded with unknown Christian mystics, that she may have used her knowledge to influence not only Mongol governance, but the very philosophical underpinnings of its empire. No direct evidence confirms this, but the pattern remains curious. During her lifetime, her sons pursued policies of relative tolerance, multicultural administration, and interreligious dialogue. After her death, these trends gradually diminished. Was Sorghaghtani the keystone, the quiet center of balance in a fracturing world? Even her death raises questions. She passed away just a year after her son Mongke became Great Khan, an apparent victory, but she left behind little personal record, no memoirs, and no detailed eulogies. It's said she was buried with honor, but the location of her grave is unknown. Another missing piece, another silence. What was her ultimate aim? Did she simply wish to preserve her family's future? Or was she quietly guiding the world's largest empire towards something more enduring, more humane? And if so, why does history so often forget her? The wind moves restlessly through the ruins of the Mongol heartland, whispering names long buried beneath the dust. Among them, perhaps, is hers, unspoken, unseen, but always near. Was Sorghaghtani Beki just a clever mother? Or was she something far more rare, a visionary who shaped history through presence rather than power, whose influence remains veiled not because it was weak, but because it was too strong to be revealed? And if she indeed saw the future with such clarity, what else might she have seen that we still do not? The canopy is thick and humid. Insects hum over the marshy rice fields, and far above, in the mountain mists of northern Vietnam, the jungle swallows all sound. Here, among banyan roots and forgotten temples, there are traces, barely visible, of a moment in history that the world has largely overlooked. Not in the deserts of Persia, nor the plains of Russia, nor the palaces of China. But here, in the sweltering tropics of Southeast Asia, the Mongol Empire once tried to leave its mark, and failed. Or did it? We remember Kublai Khan as the ruler who completed the conquest of China and founded the Yuan dynasty. His reign is often described as one of consolidation, of administration and cultural blending, rather than expansion. But there was another side to his rule, one that sent war fleets across storm-lashed seas and dispatched generals deep into foreign jungles. From Dai Viet to Champa, from Java to Burma, Kublai sought to bring the tropics under the banner of the Great Khan. And yet, the results remain obscure. Why did the Mongol invasions of Southeast Asia fail when they had succeeded nearly everywhere else? What forces resisted them so thoroughly? And why have these campaigns faded into relative obscurity, forgotten chapters in the grand saga of Mongol conquest? In 1257, the first Mongol incursion into Dai Viet, modern-day northern Vietnam, was swift and brutal. General Ögedei, son of the famous Subutai, led the assault. His forces captured the capital Thang Long, present-day Hanoi, almost effortlessly. But soon after, they withdrew. Official accounts claim it was due to heat, disease, and unfamiliar terrain. Others whisper of stronger resistance, of an enemy that refused to break. Only a few years later, Kublai Khan would try again. In 1285, and then once more in 1287, he launched massive invasions, sending tens of thousands of troops down from China and along the Red River Delta. The Vietnamese, under the Tran dynasty, fought back with cunning strategy, terrain mastery, and unrelenting guerrilla warfare. Entire Mongol fleets were burned or abandoned. Soldiers, unaccustomed to jungle combat and plagued by illness, died in droves. The invincible army of the steppe had met something it could not overcome. But the details are murky. Vietnamese chronicles, such as the Dai Viet Su Ki Tuan Tu, record victories with patriotic pride. But even they offer limited insight into the full scale of the Mongol effort. Chinese records, by contrast, understate the defeats, often blaming the failures on climate, incompetence, or bad luck. Were these simple military setbacks, or were there deeper, more complex forces at play? Some scholars believe the geography itself was the true victor. The jungles of Southeast Asia were not just dense, but sacred, intertwined with local beliefs, guardian spirits, and ancestral power. Was the land resisting, not just the people? Others point to possible overextension. Kublai Khan's empire was vast, his ambitions perhaps too wide. Could it be that Southeast Asia fell into the margins of Mongol focus, territory meant to be subdued quickly and then forgotten? If so, why return, again and again, with such costly campaigns? Then there are the stranger theories. Some fringe historians suggest that these invasions were not simply for conquest, but for something hidden. Ancient Buddhist relics, secret trade routes, or even lost knowledge housed in the dense interior of Southeast Asia. Did the Mongols believe that the jungles held something older than empires, something worth dying for? There are curious omissions in official accounts. Records of key generals vanish after these campaigns. Large numbers of ships are reported missing. In the case of the attempted invasion of Java in 1293, Mongol troops landed, fought, and then abruptly left, despite victory. Why? One account speaks of an agreement made with the Javanese ruler Raden Wijaya, but no documents survive to confirm it. Did the Mongols uncover a political situation too complex even for their empire? Or did they encounter resistance that could not be quantified, something beyond sword and strategy? Archaeological evidence remains sparse. A few rusted arrowheads, scattered bones, a carved stone in Ngayong province said to mark a Mongol encampment. But the jungle reclaims its secrets swiftly. Monsoons wash away the blood. The soil swallows the rest. And yet, stories linger. In some parts of Vietnam, oral traditions speak of giants with eyes like wolves and armor like dragons. In parts of northern Thailand, There are tales of foreign invaders who vanished into the mountains, never to return. In Java, ancient manuscripts speak of outsiders with strange horses and even stranger ambitions. Could these be distant echoes of a forgotten campaign? The official history of the Mongol Empire marches west, toward Baghdad and Kiev, Damascus, and Delhi. But to the south, to the realm of shadowy temples, steamy forests, and ancient kingdoms, there is only a whisper. Why were these campaigns launched again and again, despite their cost? Why are the records so thin, so conflicting, so incomplete? Was it merely failed expansion? Or was something hidden beneath the canopy that we still do not understand? And perhaps the greatest mystery, if the Mongols had succeeded, if Southeast Asia had fallen under their rule, how might the region look today? Or did they leave a mark we simply have not recognized yet? The wind moves restlessly across the high plains of Mongolia, whispering secrets through the tall, golden grass. Somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic pounding of hooves echoes faintly, as if ghosts of long-vanished riders still patrol the steppe. And near the edge of a ravine, worn stone markers lie half-buried in the earth, mute witnesses to a time when empires were forged by the sword and nearly broken by the dagger. It is easy to see Genghis Khan as untouchable. The founder of the Mongol Empire, the conqueror of cities, the master of cavalry warfare. His legend looms so large that it eclipses the very real dangers he faced, not from the battlefield, but from within his own ranks. While his rise from orphaned exile to supreme ruler has been well documented, there remains a quieter narrative, one not found in triumphal chronicles or imperial decrees. A tale of hidden threats, quiet betrayals, and silent blades. The secret assassination attempts against Genghis Khan. How close did the world come to never knowing his name? Historians agree, Genghis Khan's unification of the Mongol tribes was brutal and deeply personal. Between 1180 and 1206, he defeated rival warlords, some of whom had once been his allies, others lifelong enemies. The steppe, a place of shifting loyalties and unforgiving customs, did not allow for peaceful transitions. Blood feuds lingered, old insults festered. And so it was during this volatile period, even before he adopted the name Chinggis Khan, that the first recorded attempt on his life emerged. According to the secret history of the Mongols, the closest source to his early life, a man named Jamuka, his blood brother turned bitter enemy, allegedly sent emissaries not just to fight, but to poison. One version tells of tainted food delivered under the guise of a peace offering, another of a trusted guard bribed to strike while the Khan slept. Neither succeeded, but neither were ever officially investigated. Were these rumors or suppressed truths? And then there is the curious tale of Altan, a Mongol noble once loyal to Temujin. After a falling out, Altan's camp was reportedly found empty, his yurt burned, and his warriors scattered. No bodies, no blood, just a note nailed to a tree, warning of retribution to come. Some believe Altan tried to strike Genghis during a council meeting, but was intercepted by the shaman Kokochu. The incident is not found in any Chinese sources, and Mongol annals treat it with odd brevity. Why? Later, during the great campaigns into Central Asia and the Khwarezmian Empire, the stakes grew higher. Genghis Khan had become not just a warlord, but the most feared ruler alive. And with that, the threats evolved. Some came from defeated enemies who, even in their dying moments, refused submission. In one chilling case, it is said that a captured Persian commander offered to guide the Mongols through a safe pass, only to lead them into an ambush. Others came from within his own vast court. The Mongol Empire, for all its outward simplicity, became increasingly complex after the conquest of Bukhara and Samarkand. Advisors from all corners, Uyghur scribes, Chinese engineers, Persian merchants, entered his circle, a diversity of knowledge, but also a web of shifting loyalties. Could one of these foreign elites have tried to manipulate events from the shadows? In 1224, Genghis Khan reportedly fell ill during a return journey from the west. Official records cite fatigue. Some versions mention a fall from horseback. But a few strange texts hint at another cause: poisoning. No culprit was ever identified. The story vanishes almost as quickly as it appears. Curiously, it would not be the only time that theory surfaced. One of the most enduring legends comes from the mysterious circumstances surrounding the Tangut campaign of 1227, Genghis Khan's final military operation. He was reportedly in good health at the start, but by the time the campaign reached its climax, he was dead. The official version? He died from injuries sustained during a horsefall. Another states he succumbed to fever. But there is a third theory, whispered over centuries, that a Tangut princess, taken as a war prize, hid a dagger in her robes and mortally wounded the Khan while alone in his tent. The story was repeated by Persian chroniclers with varying detail. Some say it happened on the first night, others say he lingered for weeks. Mongol records, however, remain curiously silent on the incident. Was this an assassination covered up to preserve the image of divine strength? Or was it merely a fable designed to give the Tangut people a final symbolic victory? Even more speculative are the accounts from later UN sources claiming a plot by Chinese Taoist alchemists. One version, found in a text recovered during the 18th century, claims that an elixir promised to prolong life was delivered to the Great Khan, and that shortly after drinking it, he became violently ill. If true, was it truly a failed attempt at immortality, or an assassination disguised as a gift? There are no surviving medical records, no autopsy, just a tightly controlled announcement of his death, a secretive funeral, and a hurried succession. And that, perhaps, is the strangest part of all. In a world where every battle was recorded in detail, where Genghis Khan's victories were carved into stone and sung across the steppes, the threats to his life remain barely whispered, fragmented, elusive. Why? Was it fear of tarnishing his myth? Or were these events quietly erased by those who had the most to gain from his survival, or from his death? And how many other attempts were buried completely? We may never know how close Genghis Khan came to dying before his empire was born. We may never know how many hands reached for the hilt, only to be stopped by fate or by silence. But the steppe remembers, and beneath the earth perhaps the truth still lingers, unspoken, waiting for someone to ask the right question. In the remote hills of Khenti province, eastern Mongolia, the wind sighs endlessly over the green ridges. Pine forests murmur with age-old secrets, and the Onon River, quiet and unassuming, flows steadily, as it has for thousands of years. These are the ancestral lands of Genghis Khan, the ground upon which a boy named Temujin was born into violence and exile. But buried beneath the soil of his legacy lies a question no conqueror could silence. A question whispered even among his most devoted followers. Who was his real father? It seems simple enough. The official records tell us that Temujin's father was Yeshugei, a respected tribal leader of the Borjigin clan. A man of strength and cunning, Yeshugei arranged his son's marriage early and led his family across the Mongol steppes in search of alliances. But behind this narrative lies a darker thread, one shrouded in gossip, secrecy, and suspicion. Could it be that the man credited as the father of the greatest conqueror in history was not his father at all? The Secret History of the Mongols, our closest contemporary source on Temujin's early life, is both a historical account and a coded family chronicle. While it honors Yesugei's role, it also leaves room for ambiguity, mentioning briefly that Temujin was born shortly after a military campaign. Yesugei had taken a Tatar bride named Holun from another man, abducting her during a raid. Temujin, we are told, was born not long after. But the timing, scholars note, is suspicious. How soon after the abduction did Hoelun give birth? The sources are vague. Was the child conceived by Yesugei, or by the man she was taken from? That man was a Merkit warrior named Chilidu, and though we know little about him, his name echoes with importance. If Chilidu fathered Temujin, the implications would upend everything we know about Mongol succession, tribal legitimacy, and even Genghis Khan's claim to the Borjigin lineage. But how could this matter have remained so quiet? Wouldn't rivals have seized on such a scandal? Perhaps they did. Throughout his life, Temujin faced accusations of illegitimacy. His family's power plummeted after Yesugei's sudden death, and rival clans refused to honor the traditional protections usually given to a tribal chief's widow and children. His family was cast out, ostracized, forced to survive by scavenging roots and fishing from frozen rivers. Was this merely political ruthlessness? Or was it, in part, a rejection based on whispered doubts about his bloodline? Even later, when Temujin began to rise, unifying the Mongol tribes under his banner, some clans, especially among the Taichi Ud, referred to him as not of true descent. The insult may seem vague, but in the world of Mongol kinship, blood was everything, and the shadow of a Merkit father would have rendered him impure, a pretender, or worse, an enemy-born usurper. Could this be why Genghis Khan so fiercely targeted the Merkit people in his early campaigns? History records 3 full-scale assaults launched against them between 1187 and 1206. Their warriors were crushed, their nobles executed. Their women, possibly including relatives of his mother's original husband, were taken into Mongol households. Was this simply strategic warfare, or an attempt to erase something deeply personal, perhaps even to eliminate those who could reveal a forbidden truth? In modern times, genetic studies have only deepened the mystery. In 2003, a groundbreaking study revealed that nearly 1 in 200 men alive today carry a Y chromosome marker associated with Genghis Khan's male descendants. This genetic legacy has helped researchers trace his paternal line across Central Asia, but it also raises uncomfortable questions. If we can trace his male descendants so clearly, could we also trace his ancestry? Some have called for testing remains believed to belong to Yesugei, or even relatives of the Merkit tribe, in an attempt to unravel the puzzle. But the location of such remains, if they still exist, is uncertain. And even if found, would modern Mongolian authorities allow such an investigation, given its potential to alter national mythology? It is here that history hesitates. Other theories, more speculative in nature, suggest an entirely different lineage. Some propose that Genghis Khan may have been the product of a secret union between Holun and a now lost warrior from a spiritual sect, perhaps a shamanic bloodline. This view, while unsupported by evidence, leans on the uncanny aura often associated with Genghis's life, his survival against impossible odds, his meteoric rise from nothing, and his almost mythic ability to inspire fear and loyalty in equal measure. Was there something extraordinary in his blood? Something outsiders sensed, but could never name? Or was it simply the will of a man determined to write his own destiny, regardless of who begot him? Even more curious is the silence of Genghis Khan himself. Despite his sweeping reforms and reorganization of tribal structures, he never emphasized his father's legacy. He named no cities after Yesugei. He offered no great temples in his memory. His laws invoked his ancestors in general terms, but rarely singled out his father for reverence. Was this oversight intentional, Or did it reflect something deeper, perhaps a quiet doubt, or a truth he could never publicly confront? Today, the region where Temujin was born remains largely untouched by time. The grasses still sway, the river still glides, and in the cold air, the names of ancient clans seem to echo faintly, lost to all but the most attentive ears. And yet, the question lingers. Who was Genghis Khan's real father? Was it Yasugai, the man of the Borjigan line as tradition holds, or was it a Merkit warrior whose name history has nearly erased? Or is the truth even more elusive, woven into the oral histories now long forgotten? In the end, perhaps the mystery of Genghis Khan's bloodline reflects the very nature of his rise, uncertain, controversial, and deeply rooted in the shifting sands of power. A man born into doubt, who became the most certain force of his time. And perhaps that is what still captivates us, not just the empire he forged, but the enigma from which it began. In the steamy lowlands of East Java, where palm fronds rustle in the monsoon wind and volcanoes smolder against the sky, an ancient battle once raged, one that few today remember. The scent of clove still drifts over old stone temples, and rice terraces wind through hills like green serpents. But somewhere beneath this serene landscape lie the echoes of an improbable event, a clash between the Mongol Empire and a distant Javanese kingdom. A confrontation so brief, yet so perplexing, that it has nearly vanished from the pages of mainstream history. It was the year 1293. The Mongol Empire, at the height of its reach under the rule of Kublai Khan, had already subjugated China, Korea, Tibet, and vast parts of Central Asia. Its navy now turned southward, toward the archipelagos of Southeast Asia, reaching ever closer to the Indian Ocean. But among the most curious of these southern campaigns is one that history has largely glossed over: the failed Mongol invasion of Java. Why did it happen? Why has it been forgotten? And what, if anything, remains of it beneath Java's soil? The story begins in China, in the court of Kublai Khan. According to Yuan dynasty chronicles, Kublai dispatched envoys to the Javanese king, known as Kirtanagara of Singasari, demanding tribute, part of the Mongol diplomatic formula for submission. But instead of negotiation, Kirtanagara responded with brutal defiance. He mutilated the Khan's emissaries, branding their faces and sending them back humiliated. Such an act was not merely political, it was sacrilegious to the Mongol mind, and it demanded retribution. 3 years later, a fleet of around 1,000 ships carrying possibly 20,000 to 30,000 Mongol and Chinese troops set sail from southern China, destined for Java's shores. By comparison, the more famous Mongol invasions of Japan had ended in failure, yet they are remembered. Why then has this Javanese campaign, which involved such scale and preparation, faded into obscurity? Even more baffling is what happened next. When the Mongols finally landed on Java's north coast near the port of Tuban, they found something unexpected. Kirtanagara, the target of their vengeance, was already dead, murdered by a rebellious vassal named Jayakatwang. Suddenly, the invaders were without their enemy, and without a clear objective. It was then that Raden Wijaya, Kirtanagara's exiled son-in-law, approached the Mongol generals with an offer. If they helped him reclaim his throne and defeat Jayakatwang, he would pledge allegiance to the Great Khan. The Mongols agreed. For a brief moment, Java's internal politics and the ambitions of the world's largest empire aligned. Jayakatwang was swiftly defeated. The Mongols believed they had succeeded. But the alliance was a trap. As soon as victory was secured, Raden Wijaya turned on his Mongol allies. Using a combination of deception and surprise, he ambushed their forces, exploiting their exhaustion, unfamiliarity with the terrain, and the oppressive tropical climate. Caught off guard and suffering from disease, the Mongols retreated, harried all the way back to their ships. Some never made it home. The entire expedition had lasted barely 4 months. It ended not with conquest, but with confusion, with betrayal, with silence. Why was such a dramatic turn of events not more widely chronicled? Some historians suggest that the Yuan court was embarrassed by the campaign's outcome and intentionally downplayed it. Records were sparse. Official documents focused on troop numbers and dates, avoiding descriptions of defeat. And in Java, too, the invasion was curiously muted in local chronicles. The Majapahit Empire, founded by Raden Wijaya after his betrayal of the Mongols, would rise to become one of the most powerful kingdoms in Southeast Asian history. But even in its epic poems and carved reliefs, the Mongol campaign receives scant mention. Was this silence a way to erase shame? Or could it have served a more subtle purpose, burying political treachery behind myth and blending fact with fiction? Even today, few physical traces of the invasion survive. No mass graves have been uncovered, no major artifacts retrieved. Only vague reports of pottery shards and weapons near Java's northern coast hint at the scope of the conflict. Most clues are linguistic or genealogical. Tales passed down by Javanese noble families who claim descent from those chaotic months in 1293. But whispers persist. Some speculate that the Mongols never truly left Java, that a remnant force, cut off from retreat, disappeared into the jungle and intermarried with local populations. The idea seems fanciful, but one must wonder, could traces of Mongol DNA be hidden within certain communities today? Some ethnographers have noted unusual facial features in isolated groups. Others point to warrior customs in Java that bear a strange resemblance to Mongol traditions. Coincidence? Or evidence of an unrecorded assimilation? And then there is the question of why Kublai Khan never retaliated. After the betrayal, the Khan still commanded vast resources. Why not send a second expedition? Was the failure simply too costly? Or did something happen on the island that dissuaded further action? More mystical theories have surfaced in fringe circles. Some claim that Java, renowned for its volcanic energy and ancient spiritual traditions, held power the Mongols could not comprehend. That storms, fevers, and defeats were not mere chance, but the island's resistance in a different, more arcane form. These theories are unsupported by evidence, yet they linger, like incense in an old temple, adding to the atmosphere of obscured history. Today, as travelers walk the weathered corridors of Candi Penataran or peer into the rice plains of East Java, few imagine that Mongol horses once galloped across these fields, that warriors from the cold steppes of Mongolia once clashed swords with kriss-wielding Javanese defenders. Fewer still realize that the failed invasion shaped the rise of Majapahit, an empire that would dominate maritime Southeast Asia for centuries. So why do we remember the Mongol failures in Japan, but forget those in Java? Why are some defeats inscribed into history, while others fade like mist? And perhaps most intriguingly, did the Mongols truly leave? Or is their legacy still buried beneath Java's restless soil, waiting to be unearthed by those willing to look? In the parched valleys of northwestern Iran, where the copper-colored hills of Sultania meet the shadows of forgotten roads, silence clings to the ruins of a once great power. Cracked stone walls, sun-bleached and wind-worn, rise like ghosts from the dust. Here, in the old heartland of the Ilkhanate, the Mongol Khanate that ruled over Persia, legends murmur beneath the earth. Among them, none is more tantalizing, more enduring, than the tale of the vanished gold. Centuries have passed since the Ilkhans rode through these lands in silken armor, emissaries of a fragmented Mongol world once unified under Genghis Khan. Their palaces are crumbled, their names scattered in worn manuscripts. But the question lingers: what became of their immense wealth? Where is the hoard that once financed the building of grand mosques, the minting of rare coins, the feeding of whole armies. And why, after the fall, did it disappear without a trace? The Ilkhanate was founded in the mid-13th century by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan and brother of Kublai Khan. After devastating Baghdad in 1258, Hulagu established dominion over a swath of territory stretching from the Anatolian plateau to the borders of India. The Ilkhans were no mere military governors. They ruled like kings, building an empire rich in art, architecture, and commerce. Their wealth was staggering. From trade routes extending to China and the Mediterranean to the spoils of conquest, the Ilkhanate collected taxes, tribute, and bullion on an imperial scale. Gold flowed through Tabriz, their first capital, like a river. Minters in Moraga and Baghdad produced coins of dazzling craftsmanship, some still unearthed today by treasure hunters and archaeologists alike. But after the death of Abu Sa'id Bahadur Khan in 1335, the last effective ruler of the Ilkhanate, the empire collapsed into chaos. Civil war fractured the Khanate. Factions emerged. Succession disputes raged. And amidst this turbulence, the treasury, so meticulously guarded by generations, simply vanished. The historical record is strangely silent. Persian chronicles, often meticulous in detailing court intrigue and battles, provide few clues as to the fate of the Ilkhanate's wealth. No grand caravan is mentioned departing the capital. No invasion force is credited with looting it. No final transaction or treasury inventory survives. Some historians believe the gold was steadily drained during the decline, used to buy loyalty, fund mercenaries, or satisfy political debts. Over time, it may have been dispersed across warring principalities, absorbed piecemeal into smaller successor states. But this theory leaves much unexplained. For example, the sudden disappearance of state minting in Tabriz after 1335, or the abrupt halt in records of tax collection from some of the empire's richest provinces. It's as if, in the span of a few months, the financial engine of the Ilkhanate ground to a halt and left no wreckage. Could the gold have been hidden? Some believe so. One theory, whispered among fringe researchers, suggests that in the final days of Abu Sa'id's reign, a secret order of treasurers, loyal not to the fractured factions, but to the Mongol ideal itself, buried or concealed the empire's remaining wealth to keep it from falling into enemy hands. Maps, if they ever existed, are long lost. But stories persist of sealed vaults beneath the mountains of Alamut, of forgotten catacombs beneath Sultaniya, or caches guarded in Sufi shrines where gold was hidden among the relics of saints. Others point to the subterranean ruins discovered near Lake Urmia, tunnels and chambers whose original purpose remains uncertain. Were they merely storage cellars, or something more? No definitive evidence has surfaced, yet the rumor continues to inspire clandestine excavations. There are stranger possibilities. In 2006, a hoard of 14th-century silver coins was discovered near the ruins of Takht-e Soleiman, an ancient fire temple later used as a Mongol retreat. Among the coins was a piece unlike any others, a medallion bearing not Persian calligraphy, but a fusion of Arabic script and Mongolian symbols. Some believe it was ceremonial, perhaps belonging to a treasurer or noble entrusted with more than coin. Had this site once held more? And if so, was it looted, forgotten, or something else entirely? Hories have ranged from the plausible to the fantastic. Some propose that the Ilkhanate gold was smuggled east, sent secretly back to Mongolia to fund one of the last attempts to reunite the Khanates under a single leader. Others believe it was taken westward, and that fragments of the treasure resurfaced in the hands of later Turkic dynasties, disguised, melted down, repurposed into the foundation of new imperial economies. A more speculative idea draws connections between the Ilkhanate's decline and the rise of mysterious financial networks in medieval Europe. Could some of the gold have made its way through intermediaries, Venetian traders perhaps, and entered a shadow economy that bankrolled the early Italian city-states? The evidence is tenuous, but the silence in Persian sources is matched by unexplained spikes in gold coin circulation in places like Florence and Genoa in the mid-14th century. Coincidence? Or hidden consequence? In the end, the question remains: where did it all go? How does a fortune amassed over generations, stored in guarded fortresses and sacred cities, vanish so thoroughly that not even legend agrees on its resting place? Perhaps the gold lies still, beneath forgotten vaults in the Zagros Mountains or beneath the silt of dried riverbeds. Perhaps it was melted down, recast, made invisible by time, or perhaps, and this is the thought that haunts some historians, it never existed in the way we imagine. What if the Ilkhanate, like so many imperial mirages, was built not on gold, but on credit, promises, and prestige? A financial system held together by fear and image. And when the Khans fell, so too did the illusion of their riches. But if the gold was real, and if it was hidden, then the greatest treasure of the Mongol West may still lie buried beneath the Persian soil, waiting to be uncovered by eyes that know where to look. Beneath the faded stone arches of the Croix des Chevaliers, a towering Crusader fortress nestled in the hills of modern-day Syria, the scent of dust and centuries-old lichen clings to the limestone walls. Once a bastion of Christian power in the Levant, the citadel now lies silent, its halls echoing with memories of armor, intrigue, and unexpected diplomacy. For among the most curious footnotes in the chronicles of empire is a quiet, long-forgotten suggestion that the Mongol rulers of the East and the Crusader lords of the West once stood not as enemies, but as cautious allies. Could it be true? Did the empire of Genghis Khan, nomads from the Asian steppes, truly forge covert alliances with European knights, even as both sides appeared to stand on opposite ends of a cultural and religious chasm? The answer, it seems, is more complicated than it appears. The Mongol incursions into the Islamic world in the 13th century sent tremors through both Muslim and Christian realms. The sack of Baghdad in 1258 by Hulagu Khan, leader of the newly formed Ilkhanate, shocked the Muslim world. The fall of the Abbasid Caliphate seemed to mark the end of an era. But to European powers, the Mongols represented something else entirely, a possible divine intervention. For years, rumors had filtered westward of strange Eastern warriors who toppled Muslim kingdoms with brutal efficiency. Whispers spread across Europe. Were these men descendants of the long-lost Christian king, Prester John? Were they sent by heaven to aid the Crusades? In the courts of France and England, such speculation wasn't confined to taverns or pulpits. It crept into diplomatic circles, where real envoys were dispatched to find common cause with the Mongols. What followed was a decades-long dance of letters, proposals, and missions, half political, half fantastical. One of the most remarkable, and yet rarely discussed, diplomatic exchanges occurred in 1248, when King Louis IX of France, then in Cyprus preparing for the Seventh Crusade, received a Mongol embassy led by a man known as Ögedei. Ögedei, a general of the great Khan Guyuk, proposed a joint attack on the Muslim powers in Syria. For a brief moment in history, it seemed that Christian knights and Mongol horsemen might ride side by side into battle. But the alliance never materialized. Guyuk Khan died shortly after, and political instability followed. Later, Louis IX would dispatch his own envoys to the Mongol court, including the famed William of Rubruck, a Flemish Franciscan whose detailed accounts remain among the most important sources on Mongol civilization. Rubruck, however, found little enthusiasm among the Mongols for religious alignment. While the Khans were often tolerant of other faiths, their primary aim was conquest, not crusade. Still, these exchanges were not in vain. By the time of Hulagu Khan and the rise of the Ilkhanate in Persia, the possibility of cooperation reemerged, this time with more urgency. The Ilkhanate, though Mongol in origin, had taken root in a predominantly Muslim landscape, but it found itself at odds with its Muslim neighbors, particularly the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt. The Mamluks, a formidable force, had already halted Mongol expansion at the Battle of Ayin Jalut in 1260. Facing a powerful enemy to the west, the Ilkhans turned to Europe. Between 1262 and 1305, multiple letters were exchanged between the Ilkhans and European monarchs. Abaga Khan, Hulagu's son, sent envoys to Pope Clement IV, to Edward I of England, and to Charles of Anjou. His letters proposed a military alliance against the Mamluks, one where Crusaders would attack from the sea while the Mongols would invade from the east. At times, the coordination was astonishingly close. In 1281, Abaga's successor, Arghun Khan, coordinated with Crusader forces during the siege of Aleppo. Though the joint offensive ultimately failed, it revealed a shared strategic interest that defied traditional narratives of East versus West. But why were these alliances never formalized? Why, despite years of correspondence, mutual enemies, and complementary ambitions, did these two powers never truly merge their forces in battle? Some historians suggest that mutual mistrust prevented true collaboration. Others argue that logistical challenges and language barriers doomed the efforts from the start. But there is a more tantalizing possibility, one largely absent from textbooks. Certain obscure documents hint at deeper communications, meetings unrecorded in formal treaties, pacts sealed in secrecy. A letter discovered in the Vatican archives in the early 20th century, written in Persian and attributed to Ghazan Khan, appears to request not just a military alliance, but joint administration of reclaimed cities after the defeat of the Mamluks. Was there an informal understanding already in motion? Did shadow alliances shape the geopolitics of the Crusader states more than we've recognized? Even stranger are claims from a few Crusader chroniclers that Mongol messengers visited certain orders in secret, particularly the Knights Templar. One 14th century manuscript from the Crown of Aragon mentions riders from the lands of Gog and Magog being entertained in the halls of a Templar commandery, speaking through fire and ash, a possible reference to a translator's incense or symbolic ritual. Is this poetic license, or the echo of a forgotten meeting? In the chaos of the Crusades' final years, as European footholds in the Levant crumbled and Mongol Khanates fractured, whatever plans were laid between them dissolved into dust. The Mamluks remained the dominant power in the region, and the Ilkhanate eventually converted to Islam, shifting its focus away from Christian partnerships. But the quiet correspondence between these ancient enemies continues to raise questions. Were these just diplomatic gestures, born of necessity and desperation? Or do they point to a deeper, more hidden current in history, one where alliances defied culture, religion, and distance? And if some of those pacts were never written, never formalized, could they have lived on through bloodlines, through marriages, through merchants carrying more than just silk across the desert? Somewhere, perhaps in a forgotten chamber beneath Crac des Chevaliers, or a monastery vault in Armenia, lies a document, or a token, that would confirm the whispers that East and West, Mongol and Crusader, once reached across the void, not as strangers, but as secret allies. Might it still be waiting to be found? Or, more haunting still, might it already have been found and simply buried again? In the ruins of ancient fortifications scattered across Central Asia, scorched stones lie buried beneath layers of sand and silence. Charred remnants, sometimes mistaken for the after-effects of common fires, still bear a curious signature: fragments of black powder, residue of combustion, traces of violent ignition. Could these be the forgotten fingerprints of a shadowy revolution in warfare? one that began far earlier than most textbooks admit. When one imagines the Mongol Empire, the mind conjures images of swift horsemen, storming across vast plains, loosing arrows with deadly precision. But beneath this iconic image lies a less understood truth, one tied to fire, to smoke, and to a mysterious alchemy that would one day reshape global warfare: gunpowder. How deeply were the Mongols involved in the earliest applications of this powerful force? And could it be that history has overlooked their role in the birth of gunpowder warfare? Not out of neglect, but because the truth was quietly buried centuries ago? Gunpowder's origins are widely credited to Tang Dynasty China in the 9th century AD. Alchemists seeking the elixir of immortality instead discovered an incendiary blend of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. By the time of the Song Dynasty, the recipe had become weaponized, first as fire arrows and incendiary bombs, then as primitive rockets and grenades. It is here, in the early 13th century, that the Mongols emerge. The Mongol invasion of the Jin and Song dynasties brought them face to face with this volatile substance. Chinese military manuals from the period, such as the Wujing Zongyao, describe elaborate recipes for fire lances, thunder crash bombs, and explosive mines. As the Mongols swept through northern China, capturing cities like Kaifeng and eventually Hangzhou, they didn't merely conquer, they absorbed. Some historians believe this moment marked the beginning of a seismic shift. In the siege of Kaifeng in 1232, Chinese defenders launched a mysterious device described in records as heaven-shaking thunder. According to the history of the Jin, these bombs exploded with such force that even armored soldiers and war horses were torn apart. Curiously, later Mongol records suggest similar devices appearing in their own arsenals not long afterward. Could the Mongols have seized these weapons and replicated them? And if so, did they become early pioneers in spreading gunpowder warfare westward, decades before Europe fully grasped its potential? One tantalizing clue lies in the Mongol siege of Baghdad in 1258. The Ilkhanate forces reportedly used siege weapons that launched flaming projectiles and earth-shaking explosions. This matches descriptions of Chinese-style gunpowder bombs more than it does traditional Greek fire or catapult-launched oil. Furthermore, Middle Eastern sources from the period, such as the Persian polymath Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, make oblique references to devices used by the Mongols that appear chemically inconsistent with oil-based fire. Could this be evidence of a silent transfer of gunpowder knowledge moving west under the cloak of conquest? But the mystery doesn't stop there. Following the Mongol invasions of Eastern Europe, reports began surfacing among Hungarian and Polish chroniclers of roaring machines and iron balls that exploded into flame. These claims are often dismissed as exaggerations or misunderstood accounts of traditional siege weapons. Yet, when viewed through the lens of gunpowder proliferation, they raise deeper questions. The first recorded use of cannons in Europe, at the Battle of Crécy in 1346, occurred less than a century after Mongol forces reached the edges of the continent. The rapid spread of gunpowder knowledge across the Islamic world and into Christian Europe between 1250 and 1350 has long puzzled historians. Its transmission seemed unusually swift, almost as though carried deliberately by someone who understood both its power and its potential. Could the Mongols have acted as unintentional emissaries of a new age of warfare? Or perhaps, was it intentional? While no direct Mongol treatises on gunpowder survive, the circumstantial evidence accumulates. In Persia, Chinese engineers were recorded working for Mongol commanders. In Central Asia, hybrid weapons appear, ballistas modified to launch fire lances, trebuchets adapted to hurl explosive payloads. Even Mongol armor from the late 13th century begins to show reinforced patterns, possibly as protection against blasts rather than arrows. More speculative theories suggest a secret core of Chinese alchemists or engineers embedded within the Mongol war machine, translating not just languages but technologies. This theory remains controversial, lacking firm archaeological evidence, but certain artifacts, like ceramic grenades unearthed in Iran and shaped metal canisters found along the Volga, hint at a hidden legacy. And what of the Mongol rulers themselves? Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, employed foreign engineers and maintained extensive records of military innovations. Was his court experimenting with proto-cannons and incendiary mines? The Yuan Shi, official history of the Yuan dynasty, contains veiled references to thunder-powered carts and dragonfire smoke tubes, terms that defy easy explanation. Were these merely poetic metaphors or prototypes? The greatest irony is that the Mongols, though masters of conquest, left behind relatively few written records of their own. Much of what we know comes from their enemies or their subjects. And in the realm of early gunpowder, this leaves us with an incomplete picture. A story told in burnt fortresses, in shards of unfamiliar metal, in the shocked accounts of survivors who could scarcely describe what they had witnessed. If the Mongols did play a crucial role in advancing gunpowder warfare, why has it been so thoroughly obscured? Was it lost in translation, buried beneath centuries of Eurocentric military historiography? Or is it still hidden in plain sight, embedded in the trajectory of warfare itself? In the end, perhaps it is not fire or thunder that echoes loudest from the past, but silence. The kind that surrounds forgotten battlegrounds, the kind that hides within untranslatable terms in ancient manuscripts, the kind that leaves us wondering, did the Mongols, famed for their arrows and speed, quietly light the fuse that would forever change the world? And if so, what else might they have passed down, concealed in the smoke? At the edge of a windswept plateau in northern China, buried beneath centuries of dust and erosion, lie the fragmented remains of a war machine. Thick wooden beams petrified by time, bronze fittings etched with soot. Nearby, rusted bolts and warped iron gears litter the earth like fossilized bones. Once, this machine roared with purpose, dragged into place under cover of night, loaded with the volatile knowledge of an empire. Was it Mongol, Chinese, or something in between? What role did these enigmatic siege engines play in the rise of one of the most formidable empires the world has ever known? And who, exactly, designed them? By the early 13th century, the Mongol war machine had swept across the steppes into China, Central Asia, and beyond, leaving fractured kingdoms in its wake. Their speed and tactical brilliance were legendary. Yet their success in storming fortified cities, against the high stone walls of Chinese strongholds or the desert bastions of the Islamic world, revealed a far more technical dimension of their military prowess. Contrary to popular imagination, the Mongols did not rely solely on cavalry and arrows. At key points in their campaigns, they deployed siege towers, traction trebuchets, catapults, and even primitive bomb lobbers. But where did this knowledge come from? In the fall of 1233, the Mongols laid siege to Kaifeng, the capital of the Jin dynasty. The defenders, well versed in gunpowder and mechanized defense, launched a relentless counteroffensive. Yet the Mongols matched them, device for device, volley for volley. According to both Chinese and Persian sources, the invaders employed stone-throwing machines and incendiary weapons with uncanny precision. Some reports even describe the use of whirlwind machines that tore through battlements like thunderclaps. It's here that the story becomes more complex. In the chaos of conquest, the Mongols captured more than just territory. They captured minds. Historical chronicles mention a curious figure named Guo Khan, a Chinese general and engineer who served under the Mongol Empire. He was not alone. Dozens of Song and Jin military artisans, designers of siege machines, specialists in counterweight mechanics, and chemists familiar with gunpowder mixtures were co-opted, spared, and in many cases promoted. In the siege of Xiangyang in the 1270s, one of the most pivotal battles of the southern campaigns, the Mongols deployed massive counterweight trebuchets capable of hurling 300-pound projectiles. These were not nomadic inventions. According to the Persian historian Juvayni, these siege engines were built under the guidance of two engineers from the Levant, Ismail and Al-Akmar, who had been brought east after earlier Mongol invasions. But some modern historians believe their designs were based not on Western models, but on earlier Chinese prototypes, refined and reinterpreted. Could it be that the Mongols, while often credited with introducing these machines to the West, were in fact building on an engineering tradition that had quietly developed in Chinese military academies for centuries? The Wujing Zongyao, a Chinese military compendium compiled in the 11th century, 200 years before the Mongol conquests, already detailed advanced siege engines, torsion-based machines, and formulae for various gunpowder applications. This text, and others like it, suggest that Chinese engineers had long been experimenting with technologies well beyond the imagination of most of their contemporaries. And yet, their contributions under Mongol command remain shrouded in ambiguity. There are few names, few documents, little fanfare. Why were these Chinese engineers not celebrated more openly in Mongol records? Was it because their expertise was seen as a utilitarian necessity, not something to be immortalized? Or was their role deliberately veiled, kept hidden from rival powers, buried in the same secrecy that cloaked the roots of Mongol intelligence and diplomacy? An even more provocative theory suggests that certain innovations were intentionally obscured in historical accounts. Some speculate that a secret corps of engineers, perhaps recruited from the crumbling Song dynasty, was established by the Mongol court for covert development of military technology. No written proof of such a unit has been found, yet tantalizing hints persist in cross-cultural records. Chinese artifacts unearthed in distant Mongol-era fortresses across Central Asia. Engineering schematics discovered in 14th century Persian manuscripts, bearing marks of both Chinese script and Mongolian seal. The deeper question remains: how much of the Mongol Empire's success can truly be attributed to Mongol ingenuity, and how much to those they absorbed? If the great Khans were pragmatic conquerors, welcoming artisans, doctors, and scholars from across the known world, then surely they recognized the value of Chinese engineering. But the silence that surrounds these collaborators speaks louder than any statue or scroll. Could this omission be accidental? Or is it part of a broader pattern, where the tools of conquest are remembered, but the hands that built them are forgotten? In the end, we are left with fragments. Soot-blackened wheels, faded manuscripts, silent battlefields, each a whisper from the past. Was it the thunder of hooves alone that broke the gates of Samarkand, Baghdad, and Xiangyang? Or was it also the quiet precision of an engineer's compass, sketching new machines by lantern light under the supervision of a distant emperor? And if we do not yet see the full picture, how much still lies buried beneath centuries of soil and smoke? What other secrets did these engineers carry with them into the heart of the Mongol Empire? And what legacies did they leave behind, unseen? In the rolling steppe near the Volga River, where the winds carry echoes of forgotten battles and golden grass stretches to the horizon, lie the barely visible outlines of what was once a capital, the great city of Sarai. Beneath this earth, now mostly silent, rested the beating heart of the Golden Horde, a western extension of the vast Mongol Empire. It was here that Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan and founder of the Golden Horde, ruled with an iron will and a keen political mind. He was both conqueror and statesman, a man who terrified Europe and yet never crowned himself Khagan. Instead, he built his power in the West, patiently, shrewdly, and passed the torch to those who would carry his legacy forward. But one such torch was mysteriously extinguished before it ever fully burned. What happened to Batu Khan's heir? We know Batu Khan had sons. Among them, Sartak, the most prominent, was groomed for leadership. Sartak was baptized as a Christian in the Nestorian rite, likely to maintain diplomatic harmony with the Russian principalities and the Orthodox Church. His appointment was strategic. Batu, ever pragmatic, had plans that stretched across religions, cultures, and continents. In 1255, Sartak traveled east, summoned to the imperial capital of Karakorum by Mongka Khan, the new great Khan of the Mongol world. The purpose? Some say it was confirmation of his title as ruler of the Golden Horde. Others believe Sartak was delivering tribute or negotiating alliances. But what happened after his arrival remains murky, because Sartak never returned. Official accounts claim Sartak died suddenly on his journey home. The cause? Unknown. No chronicled illness, no wounds of battle, no funeral rites described in the usual Mongol tradition, just gone. Even the location of his death is debated. Was it somewhere along the Siberian frontier? Within the confines of Mongolia? Or perhaps en route through Central Asia? None of the primary Mongol, Russian, or Persian sources offer a consistent answer. Why? The Mongols were meticulous record keepers, especially when it came to imperial matters. So why does the trail of Sartak, heir to Batu Khan, vanish so completely? Some scholars suggest he died of natural causes, perhaps disease or altitude sickness. Yet this seems strangely convenient for a young, healthy prince traveling with the resources of the Mongol elite. Others argue he may have been assassinated, poisoned perhaps, either by rivals within the horde or agents of the central Mongol court. At the time, tensions were growing between Batu's powerful western faction and Mongka's increasingly assertive rule. The Golden Horde had long operated with a sense of independence, even as it pledged loyalty to the Great Khan. Was Sartak a threat to Mongka's consolidation of power? Or had he perhaps offended someone at court? Even more shadowy theories begin to emerge in fringe historical writings. One obscure Persian manuscript hints that Sartak was detained, not killed, but quietly removed from the line of succession and placed under house arrest somewhere in the east. A political prisoner, hidden in plain sight. Another, even more esoteric Chinese source, found in the margins of a later Yuan-era text, describes a northern prince who traveled west and never returned, carried off by his own blood. The meaning is cryptic. Was it metaphorical? A betrayal by his kin? Could Sartak have been caught in a power struggle not only between East and West, but within his own family? What adds to the intrigue is what came next. After Sartak's death, or disappearance, his son Ulagchi was named successor, but he was a child, too young to rule on his own. Batu's brother Berk quickly assumed regency, and within a few years seized control of the Golden Horde outright. Berk, unlike Sartak, had converted to Islam. He would go on to wage war against his cousin Hulagu in the south, igniting the first major civil conflict within the Mongol Empire, the Berk-Hulagu War. Was this all a coincidence, or a careful orchestration? If Sartak had lived, would the Golden Horde have embraced Christianity? Would the war with Hulagu have been avoided? Would the Mongol Empire itself have remained more united, adding yet another layer of mystery? No known burial site exists for Sartaq. Mongol noble burials, especially for those of high status, were secretive by design. But eventually, legends, markers, or oral traditions would often point the way. Yet in Sartaq's case, there is nothing. No tomb, no mausoleum, no shrine. Even the rulers who followed made little mention of him. It is as if his brief ascent and sudden descent had been wiped clean from the royal ledger. Could it be that his death was not simply unfortunate, but necessary? In the rolling steppe near the Volga River, where the winds carry echoes of forgotten battles and golden grass stretches to the horizon, lie the barely visible outlines of what was once a capital, the great city of Sarai. Beneath this earth, now mostly silent, rested the beating heart of the Golden Horde, a western extension of the vast Mongol Empire. It was here that Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan and founder of the Golden Horde, ruled with an iron will and a keen political mind. He was both conqueror and statesman, a man who terrified Europe and yet never crowned himself Kagan. Instead, he built his power in the West, patiently, shrewdly, and passed the torch to those who would carry his legacy forward. But one such torch was mysteriously extinguished before it ever fully burned. What happened to Batu Khan's heir? We know Batu Khan had sons. Among them, Sartaq, the most prominent, was groomed for leadership. Sartaq was baptized as a Christian in the Nestorian rite, likely to maintain diplomatic harmony with the Russian principalities and the Orthodox Church. His appointment was strategic. Batu, ever pragmatic, had plans that stretched across religions, cultures, and continents. In 1255, Sartaq traveled east, summoned to the imperial capital of Karakorum by Mongka Khan, the new great Khan of the Mongol world. The purpose? Some say it was confirmation of his title as ruler of the Golden Horde. Others believe Sartaq was delivering tribute or negotiating alliances. But what happened after his arrival remains murky, because Sartaq never returned. Official accounts claim Sartaq died suddenly on his journey home. The cause? Unknown. No chronicled illness, no wounds of battle, no funeral rites described in the usual Mongol tradition, just gone. Even the location of his death is debated. Was it somewhere along the Siberian frontier? Within the confines of Mongolia? Or perhaps en route through Central Asia? None of the primary Mongol, Russian, or Persian sources offer a consistent answer. Why? The Mongols were meticulous record keepers, especially when it came to imperial matters. So why does the trail of Sartaq, heir to Batu Khan, vanish so completely? Some scholars suggest he died of natural causes, perhaps disease or altitude sickness. Yet this seems strangely convenient for a young, healthy prince traveling with the resources of the Mongol elite. Others argue he may have been assassinated, poisoned perhaps, either by rivals within the horde or agents of the central Mongol court. At the time, tensions were growing between Batu's powerful western faction and Mongka's increasingly assertive rule. The Golden Horde had long operated with a sense of independence, even as it pledged loyalty to the Great Khan. Was Sartaq a threat to Mongka's consolidation of power? Or had he perhaps offended someone at court? Even more shadowy theories begin to emerge in fringe historical writings. One obscure Persian manuscript hints that Sartaq was detained, not killed, but quietly removed from the line of succession and placed under house arrest somewhere in the east. A political prisoner, hidden in plain sight. Another, even more esoteric Chinese source, found in the margins of a later Yuan-era text, describes a northern prince who traveled west and never returned, carried off by his own blood. The meaning is cryptic. Was it metaphorical? A betrayal by his kin? Could Sartaq have been caught in a power struggle not only between East and West, but within his own family? What adds to the intrigue is what came next. After Sartaq's death, or disappearance, his son Ulagchi was named successor, but he was a child, too young to rule on his own. Batu's brother Berk quickly assumed regency, and within a few years seized control of the Golden Horde outright. Berk, unlike Sartaq, had converted to Islam. He would go on to wage war against his cousin Hulagu in the south, igniting the first major civil conflict within the Mongol Empire, the Berk-Hulagu War. Was this all a coincidence, or a careful orchestration? If Sartaq had lived, would the Golden Horde have embraced Christianity? Would the war with Hulagu have been avoided? Would the Mongol Empire itself have remained more united? Adding yet another layer of mystery. No known burial site exists for Sartaq. Mongol noble burials, especially for those of high status, were secretive by design. But eventually, legends, markers, or oral traditions would often point the way. Yet in Sartaq's case, there is nothing. No tomb, no mausoleum, no shrine. Even the rulers who followed made little mention of him. It is as if his brief ascent and sudden descent had been wiped clean from the royal ledger. Could it be that his death was not simply unfortunate, but necessary? The palaces of Khanbalik, once shining with the splendor of gold-inlaid walls and intricate Mongol Chinese carvings, are now silent ruins beneath the modern sprawl of Beijing. Stones that once echoed with imperial decrees now sit buried beneath centuries of soil and soot. This was the heart of the Yuan dynasty, the seat of Kublai Khan's dream. A Mongol empire reborn in the east, reimagined through Chinese silk and Confucian order. But something happened here, something that textbooks often compress into a single line. The Yuan dynasty collapsed in 1368. Collapsed. A word that suggests suddenness, inevitability. As if it were the falling of a wall in a storm, and not the slow unraveling of one of history's most powerful dynasties. What really caused the fall of the Yuan, and what remains hidden beneath the surface of its final days? At its height, the Yuan dynasty controlled the largest continuous empire in Chinese history, from the rain-soaked hills of Yunnan to the icy winds of Manchuria, from the Mongolian plateau to the bustling ports of the South China Sea. Kublai Khan's empire stretched over landscapes as diverse as its people. It was an empire of extraordinary ambition. Kublai himself, grandson of Genghis Khan, had embraced Chinese customs, claimed the mandate of heaven, and attempted to fuse steppe governance with millennia of dynastic bureaucracy. So why, just under a century later, did it all disintegrate? Most historians point to a familiar blend of causes: internal corruption, economic instability, natural disasters, and growing Han Chinese resistance. All true, all documented, but still, the deeper questions remain. Why did the dynasty crumble with such finality? Why were the Mongols, who had once conquered the known world, unable to hold the mandate of heaven for even 100 years? In the official records of the Ming dynasty, which replaced the Yuan, the narrative is neat and orderly. The Yuan rulers became decadent, detached, and weak. Heaven had withdrawn its favor. But dig a little deeper, and the story begins to fracture. Mysterious famines gripped the north, despite full granaries recorded the year before. Plague outbreaks swept through garrisons, leaving whole towns silent and untouched, as if abandoned overnight. The Yellow River shifted course, displacing millions and rupturing critical supply lines. Earthquakes cracked the foundations of temples in the capital. Were these simply coincidences, or signs, omens perhaps, that something was unraveling beneath the surface? The people of the time believed the dynasty was cursed. Was this merely superstition? or something more? There are strange mentions in the Yuan Shi, the official history of the dynasty, compiled after the fall. Entries hint at court intrigues, disappearances of key ministers, and rumors of betrayal within the imperial family. One curious passage refers to voices from the sky, heard over Khanbaliq in the last years of Emperor Togon Timur's reign, interpreted by diviners as a warning of divine abandonment. Even more puzzling, the sudden withdrawal of Mongol rulers from public life. Togon Timur, the last Yuan emperor, became increasingly reclusive in his final years. Once described as energetic and politically astute, he began refusing audiences, skipping important rituals, and allegedly communicating only through whispers to a trusted few. Rumors spread of madness, or perhaps possession. His court crumbled around him. Did he see something, know something that historians missed? One of the more fringe but persistent theories suggests that the Yuan collapse was hastened by a failed experiment in sorcery and astrology. According to obscure Taoist texts from the 14th century, certain court astrologers had attempted to summon protective spirits to shield the dynasty from rebellion. Instead, the rituals invited shadows, a poetic way, perhaps, of saying they went wrong. Other speculative sources point to early contact with foreign religious sects, possibly messianic movements from Central Asia, that unsettled the ideological base of the court. Were these simply diplomatic entanglements? Or did they introduce alien beliefs that undermined the imperial structure? Stranger still are rumors that some members of the Yuan elite foresaw the dynasty's fall and planned for it. In a remote temple in the mountains of Shanxi, there exists a mural, its paint faded, its figures weathered, depicting a caravan of nobles departing under the cover of night. Unlike typical Yuan-era artwork, which glorifies conquest and court life, this scene is somber, almost funereal. Some art historians believe it portrays a secret retreat by Mongol royals, perhaps carrying sacred relics, documents, or even wealth. But to where? No official record speaks of such an exodus. Did the final heirs of the Yuan vanish willingly, taking with them the last threads of a broken dynasty? Or were they erased from history by those who rose after? What we do know is that when the Ming forces took Khanbaliq in 1368, they found a city already partially abandoned. The palace archives were incomplete. Entire wings of the imperial complex had been burned, but not by the invaders. The destruction was precise, targeted. What were they trying to hide or protect? Today, only fragments remain of the Yuan's last days. Scattered manuscripts, ghostly ruins, a few Ming-era accounts distorted by political victory. No tomb has been definitively identified as belonging to Togon Timur. His final resting place, like so much of Yuan history, is shrouded in silence. As scholars continue to sift through ancient texts and forgotten artifacts, the puzzle of the Yuan collapse remains unsolved. It is more than just a tale of dynastic decline. It is a riddle tangled in mystery, mythology, and missing pieces. And so we ask, did the Yuan dynasty truly fall because of the mundane forces of history? Or was something else, something darker, stranger, at work in its final flickering days? In the northern twilight of the Eurasian steppe, where pine forests stretch endlessly and snow cloaks the land for months at a time, there is a strange stillness, an echo of forgotten hoofbeats that once shook these plains. Wind sweeps across the empty banks of the Volga, and in the crumbling stone walls of ancient citadels like Vladimir, Tver, and Ryazan, whispers of an uneasy past still linger. This was once the domain of the Mongol yoke, a land subjugated not through annihilation, but through tribute, intimidation, and silent domination. But how deep did that domination go, and what has history chosen to forget? By the early 1240s, the Mongol armies, led by Batu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, had swept through the Rus principalities with brutal efficiency. Kiev was burned, its domes toppled and bells silenced. Other cities like Suzdal, Chernigov, and Vladimir were besieged or cowed into submission. The Rus princes, fragmented and often at odds with one another, could do little to resist. And so began an era known to Russian history as the Mongol yoke. Yet the nature of this yoke remains a mystery in itself. For nearly 2.5 centuries, the Mongol Empire, and later its successor state, the Golden Horde, exerted control over vast swaths of what is now Russia and Ukraine. But unlike other conquered territories where Mongol administration was direct and visible, here the hand of power remained cloaked. The Mongols rarely ruled these lands directly. Instead, they demanded tribute, exacted loyalty, and interfered in succession disputes, preferring to manipulate from the shadows. Why? And what exactly did they leave behind? Official chronicles tell us that Mongol rule was oppressive and stifling, a period of stagnation, fear, and economic decline. But archaeological and diplomatic evidence paints a more complex picture. Trade flourished along the Volga and Dnieper rivers. Russian princes were allowed to maintain internal autonomy, so long as they paid homage to the Khan. More curiously, cultural blending emerged. Certain Mongol legal practices were absorbed into Rus's governance. The very symbols of power, the cap of Monomakh, the two-headed eagle, are thought by some to be influenced by Mongol Turkic design. Russian military tactics shifted. Bureaucratic systems hardened. A tribute-based economy emerged, eerily reminiscent of the steppe's own tribute traditions. Was this mere adaptation? Or was there a deeper integration between the Mongols and the Rus's elites, one that history has deliberately veiled? Perhaps the most enigmatic chapter lies in the transformation of Moscow. At the start of the Mongol period, it was a minor outpost, barely a village. But within a century, it had eclipsed older power centers like Vladimir and Tver. The reason? A strategic and often overlooked relationship with the Mongols. The princes of Moscow, beginning with Ivan I, cleverly positioned themselves as loyal intermediaries, gatherers of tribute on behalf of the Golden Horde. They were rewarded with favor, titles, and eventually dominance over rival principalities. But the speed and scale of Moscow's rise have puzzled historians. Was it simply political cunning? Or did Moscow receive covert military or financial support from the Horde? Some suggest that hidden alliances, unknown to the scribes of the Orthodox Church, formed a secret scaffolding beneath Moscow's meteoric ascent. And still more puzzling, why did the Mongols trust Moscow so deeply and for so long? There are darker corners to this story. Russian folklore and obscure 15th century monastic writings hint at secret oaths taken by certain Rus's rulers before the Khans. Not merely pledges of loyalty, but ritualistic ceremonies involving ancient steppe customs, perhaps even blood rites. One chronicle mentions the drinking of black salt water beneath the crescent standard, a rite not found in Orthodox or Slavic tradition. What could this mean? Modern scholars often dismiss such accounts as allegory. But what if they point to a cultural pact, a merging of traditions that official histories, compiled during later waves of nationalistic revival, chose to forget? And what of the Mongol settlements themselves? Most have vanished without a trace. Yet in regions like the lower Volga and southern Ural steppe, the ground yields unexpected finds. Coins bearing both Mongol and Slavic inscriptions, graves with a mixture of Orthodox and Tengrist symbols, and pottery styles that defy easy classification. These aren't merely signs of trade. They may be fragments of an invisible society, one neither wholly Mongol nor Rus, but something in between. Why has so little been preserved? One of the greatest lingering mysteries is the fate of Sarai, the capital of the Golden Horde. Built near the Volga, it was once a vibrant city of minarets, pavilions, and merchants from across Eurasia. Marco Polo heard of it. Ibn Battuta visited it. But today, its ruins lie silent, still largely unexcavated. Who lived there? What secrets are buried beneath its sands? Some believe that Sarai was more than a Mongol capital. It was a cultural laboratory where Slavic, Persian, Chinese, and Turkic ideas collided and evolved. Could it have influenced the very shape of Muscovite identity? Did ideas forged there ripple into the Russian state that eventually claimed to resist Mongol legacy? If so, how ironic is it that the future czars built their legitimacy not by rejecting the Mongol past, but by mastering it? In modern Russia, the memory of Mongol domination is still politically charged. It is remembered as humiliation, as subjugation. But the true relationship was more nuanced and more mysterious. Did the Mongols simply dominate the Rus lands? Or did they implant something deeper, something invisible yet formative, a shadow that lingers still? And so the forests of the north remain silent. The bells of ancient monasteries ring across rivers that once shimmered with Mongol ships. And beneath the soil, forgotten coins and broken pacts sleep uneasily, waiting to be found. The question endures. What else lies hidden in the folds of this long, shadowy alliance? In the desolate plains near the Caspian Sea, where wind whistles through broken stones and dry grass crackles beneath the weight of centuries, silence reigns. There is no monument, no engraved plaque to mark what once unfolded here, only a vast horizon under an endless sky. Yet beneath this emptiness lies a story blurred by time, a story tied to one of the greatest military minds the world has ever known, Subutai. The name carries weight. Subutai, the legendary general of the Mongol Empire, is credited with over 60 campaigns across more than 2 decades, stretching from the gates of Beijing to the banks of the Danube. Strategist, visionary, shadow. While Genghis Khan shaped the will of the empire, Subutai wielded it with precision. But as the dust of history settles, questions rise like mirages from the steppe. What truly became of Subutai's final years? Why are his last campaigns so poorly documented? And how did the legacy of such a pivotal figure become so contested, so strangely silent? The early campaigns of Subutai are well known and almost mythic in scope. His coordination of the twin-pronged invasion of Europe in 1241, with Batu Khan leading the western push, demonstrated a level of strategic brilliance that stunned contemporary Europe. The Mongols had crushed the Hungarian and Polish forces in quick succession, even reaching the outskirts of Vienna. Then, suddenly, the campaign stopped. Most historians attribute the halt to the death of Ögedei Khan in Karakorum. As per Mongol custom, princes and generals were summoned to elect a new great Khan. Batu withdrew, and with him Subutai. But there are inconsistencies, records that suggest Subutai did not return directly to Karakorum. Instead, he vanished from the primary military narrative. Why? And where did he go? The official chronicles, especially those compiled under Kublai Khan, mention Subutai's retirement in vague terms, stating that he returned to Mongolia and died peacefully and with honor. But no tomb has ever been found. No inscriptions, no known site of burial, despite his unmatched service to the empire. For a man of such stature, who orchestrated battles that shaped continents, this absence is striking. More curious still, oral traditions from Central Asia tell a different story. In certain Tuvan and Altai tales, a great general, unnamed but with attributes unmistakably Subutai's, is said to have been exiled in his old age. Betrayed by rival princes, distrusted by the court, he wandered into the west, never to return. A myth or a hidden truth smothered by political necessity? Subbutai's last confirmed campaign was the 1241-42 European offensive. After that, records become vague and sparse. Some suggest he took part in campaigns along the Caucasus or was involved in crushing revolts in Khwarezm. Yet sources are inconsistent. Persian chroniclers such as Juvayni refer to a gray-haired commander advising from the rear, but whether this was Subbutai or a mere echo of his reputation is uncertain. In modern times, alternative theories have emerged. One proposes that Subbutai attempted to reassert Mongol authority in parts of the western steppe, clashing not only with local resistance, but with rising factions within the horde. Another posits that Subbutai, aged and disillusioned, retired not in Mongolia, but somewhere in Central Asia, perhaps near Samarkand or the Oxus River, where he faded into obscurity among nomadic kin. These stories remain unverified, resting on speculative interpretations of obscure texts and inconsistent timelines. But if he was sidelined or forced into exile, why? Could it have been political? By the time of Ögedei's death, power within the empire was shifting. Factions had begun to form around various successors: the Toluid line, the descendants of Chagatai, and Batu Khan of the Golden Horde. Subbutai, a non-royal, owed his rise to merit. But as dynastic rivalry intensified, merit could become dangerous. Was the empire, once held together by discipline and conquest, beginning to turn inward? In a letter attributed to a Persian ambassador in the mid-13th century, its authenticity debated, there's mention of a Mongol commander who knew too much of maps and kings, removed from court under a pretense of rest. The phrasing is odd. It suggests not a graceful retirement, but something else. A silencing, perhaps. What was it that Subbutai might have known? Was his understanding of far-flung territories, power structures, and trade routes too advanced, too threatening? And then there is the matter of his descendants. The Subbutai clan continued to serve in the Mongol ranks for generations, but never again did one of his blood ascend to comparable military greatness. Some accounts speak of his sons dying in minor campaigns. Others suggest a quiet erasure, perhaps a deliberate effort to minimize their influence. A few Mongolian historians today quietly whisper of a forgotten house in the mountains of Överkhangai, a lineage hidden, perhaps protected from the political purges that swept through the empire in the late 13th century. If true, why would such measures be necessary? What danger could the name Subbutai still hold? Strangely, despite his colossal achievements, no comprehensive biography of Subbutai survives from the Mongol age. While Genghis Khan's life was immortalized in the secret history of the Mongols and Kublai's campaigns meticulously recorded in Chinese annals, Subbutai remains a shadowy presence, vital to Mongol dominance, yet somehow always in the background. Was it humility? Or was it history's quiet way of covering something more complicated? Today, beneath the quiet earth and windswept grasslands of Central Asia, perhaps Subbutai still sleeps, his bones unmarked, his story unfinished. Did he retire in honor? Was he betrayed in silence? Or did the greatest general of his era vanish by design, carrying with him secrets the empire chose never to record? We may never know. But as we trace the crumbling ruins of forgotten campaigns and sift through the sands of 1,000 shifting allegiances, the question remains: what became of the man who mapped the world with arrows? Beneath the turquoise domes of Tabriz, once the capital of the Mongol Ilkhanate in Persia, the sun falls at a sharp angle across weathered stone. In the quiet corridors of abandoned madrasas and crumbling caravanserais, echoes of distant languages, Mongolian, Persian, Arabic, even Chinese, seem to hang in the dry desert air. Scripts etched into broken tiles whisper of edicts, tax codes, and philosophies now mostly forgotten. Here, in a land known for poets and prophets, the horsemen of the steppe laid down their swords and picked up ledgers. How did it happen? How did a culture known for fierce nomadism and devastating conquest so seamlessly govern the sophisticated bureaucratic heart of the Islamic world? And what remains of that strange hybrid machinery, the Mongol-Run Persian administration? The story begins with conquest. In 1258, Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, led one of the most devastating military campaigns in Middle Eastern history. Baghdad, the jewel of the Abbasid Caliphate, fell to fire and blood. But after the chaos settled, something unexpected took root. The Ilkhanate, one of the 4 primary divisions of the Mongol Empire, began to govern not by destruction, but by administration. And not just any administration, a Persian one. Despite their roots as steppe warriors, the Mongols in Persia did not simply rule by force. They adopted, adapted, and, some argue, became entangled in the deep traditions of Persian governance. Persian viziers, scribes, and scholars were brought into the fold, often wielding more actual power than the Mongol khans they served. Notably, men like Rashid al-Din, historian, physician, and grand vizier, served under multiple ilkhans, compiling the Jami al-Tawarikh, one of the most ambitious historical chronicles of the medieval world. But even here, uncertainty creeps in. Was Rashid al-Din merely a loyal servant of the Ilkhanate? Or was he the architect of a quiet cultural takeover, replacing Mongol identity with a Persian one from within? This paradox is at the heart of the enigma. On paper, the Mongols ruled. They issued edicts, collected taxes, and maintained military control. Yet in practice, the day-to-day operations were dominated by Persian bureaucrats, drawing on centuries-old Islamic and Sasanian administrative traditions. Mongol rulers, many of whom could not read or write in Persian, found themselves increasingly dependent on their secretaries and advisors. Was this a calculated decision? Or a slow erosion of authority? And more intriguingly, did the Mongols know? The Mongol court in Tabriz became a crossroads of worlds. It employed Christian envoys from Europe, Buddhist monks from Tibet, and astronomers from China. At times, it almost resembled a miniature world empire, run from the bazaars and domes of northwest Iran. Yet the deeper we look, the more we see inconsistencies in the narrative. Some documents from the period, particularly decrees attributed to Mongol rulers, display an almost poetic fluency in Persian, filled with idioms and Islamic references. Did the Khans truly author these? Or were these the polished handiwork of Persian scribes, ghostwriting history? If so, how much of the Mongol voice has been lost, rewritten, or softened? Was this cooperation, or quiet co-opting? Further complicating the picture is religion. While early Ilkhans were followers of Tengriism and later flirted with Buddhism and Christianity, a dramatic shift occurred under Ghazan Khan, who converted to Islam in 1295. With his conversion, Islam became the official religion of the Ilkhanate. Mosques flourished. Sharia law was reintroduced. Was this genuine piety, or the final triumph of Persian political thought over Mongol pragmatism? Some scholars suggest that Ghazan's conversion marked not a spiritual awakening, but a political necessity. In a land still largely Muslim, ruling as a non-Muslim had become increasingly untenable. His conversion, encouraged by advisors like Rashid al-Din, may have cemented Mongol rule, but at the cost of their unique identity. Did the conquerors become the conquered? Oddly, traces of the Mongol administrative presence in Persia vanish almost as quickly as they appeared. By the mid-14th century, the Ilkhanate collapsed under the weight of dynastic infighting and plague. Successor states claimed fragments of its territory, but the legacy of Mongol governance was strangely absent. Unlike the Chinese Yuan dynasty, which left architectural and bureaucratic footprints, the Ilkhans left behind little in the way of institutional infrastructure. Why? Were their systems so entangled with Persian structures that distinguishing them became impossible? Or did a deliberate effort emerge, perhaps from later Persian dynasties, to erase or absorb the Mongol legacy altogether? Even today, archives and manuscripts from the Ilkhanate period are difficult to trace. Some were destroyed during the invasions of Timur. Others were hidden, perhaps too closely tied to an era of uneasy collaboration or manipulation. There is one more wrinkle. In a little-known manuscript housed in a provincial library in Yazd, a letter is preserved, allegedly written by a Mongol scribe in the early 1300s. It laments the growing influence of Persian penmen who write history before the dust of battle has even settled. The phrase is haunting. It suggests an awareness, perhaps even a frustration, that control of narrative had already slipped away. Could it be that the true history of the Mongol-Persian administration lies not in official records, but in what was deliberately excluded from them? What ideas were buried beneath ornate Persian calligraphy? What ambitions disguised as loyalty? Today, we look upon the ruins of Mongol palaces in Sultania, the fading frescoes and the abandoned archives, and we wonder, was this a model of mutual governance or an invisible conquest of a different kind? Did the Mongols reshape Persia, or did Persia reshape the Mongols? Perhaps, hidden in unexamined scrolls or in the margins of forgotten ledgers, the answer still lingers, or perhaps it was never written down at all. In the windswept plains of Karakorum, where steppe grass rolls to the horizon beneath a vaulted blue sky, lie scattered fragments of stone and bone, remnants of a vanished imperial capital. Amid the ruins, faint traces of something unexpected emerge. A worn cross etched into a tile, fragments of manuscripts bearing Syriac script, the ghost of an altar, now overtaken by moss and silence. This is not the imagery we often associate with the Mongol Empire, nomads on horseback, bows drawn beneath fluttering banners of conquest. And yet, these fragile symbols hint at a spiritual current that once flowed quietly through the highest levels of Mongol power, Nestorian Christianity. How did this ancient and often persecuted faith, originating in the Middle East and exiled beyond the boundaries of the Roman Church, find a foothold among the Khans of the East? And more curiously, why has its role remained shrouded in obscurity? The story begins centuries before the Mongol conquests. By the 7th century AD, Nestorian Christianity, named after Nestorius, a controversial archbishop of Constantinople, had spread far beyond the boundaries of the Byzantine world. Cast out as heretical by the Council of Ephesus in 431 AD, its followers moved east, establishing churches across Persia, Central Asia, and even into India and China. By the time of Genghis Khan's rise in the early 13th century, Nestorian Christian communities were already embedded along the Silk Road, serving as merchants, scribes, and physicians. Their quiet resilience and widespread network made them ideal cultural intermediaries in a world about to be torn open by Mongol expansion. But here, the historical waters grow murky. Sources tell us that many Mongol elite women, including Genghis Khan's daughters-in-law and wives of prominent generals, were Nestorian Christians. Sorghaghtani Beki, the powerful mother of Kublai Khan and Hulagu Khan, was among the most influential. Described by Persian historians as both wise and pious, her faith did not hinder her influence. It may have enhanced it. But what did this faith look like within the context of a nomadic empire? There were no great cathedrals in the steppe. Instead, small wooden churches, portable relics, and crosses carved into saddles and belts offered more subtle expressions of belief. It was a Christianity adapted to movement, unmoored from the rigid hierarchies of Europe, yet spiritually complex. Still, we must ask, how much power did it hold? Was this merely a tolerated minority faith, or something more strategically embedded in Mongol governance? By the time the Mongols reached the Middle East, their interactions with Christian powers became overt. Hulagu Khan famously corresponded with Louis XIX of France and the Pope, proposing a potential alliance against the common enemy, Islam. These proposals, known as the Franco-Mongol alliance attempts, remain one of the strangest footnotes in Crusader history. Letters were exchanged, emissaries dispatched, and for a moment, history seemed poised for a surreal convergence. Mongol horsemen fighting alongside European knights under the banner of the cross. But such alliances never materialized. Political agendas diverged. Trust was thin. And beneath the surface, something deeper may have been at play. Some historians suggest that these diplomatic gestures were not purely political, but spiritual. That Nestorian Christians within the Mongol court, fluent in Latin and Arabic, sought to connect East and West not through conquest, but through a shared religious identity. Could it be that the Church of the East saw the Mongol Empire as the vessel for a long-awaited Christian resurgence? If so, what happened to that vision? There are records of Nestorian bishops being present at the Mongol court, of crosses carved into palace doors, of liturgies conducted in Syriac for Mongol royalty. Yet these are scattered pieces, often contradicted or ignored by more dominant narratives. The Yuan dynasty in China, under Kublai Khan, is known to have housed a Nestorian Christian metropolitan in the capital, alongside Muslim qadis, Buddhist monks, and Taoist priests. This strange religious pluralism, almost unique for its time, created an atmosphere where no single faith reigned supreme. Yet, curiously, Nestorianism faded faster than the rest. By the 14th century, its presence in Mongol territory had all but disappeared. Why? Was it absorbed into other religions? Or did its influence become politically inconvenient? The conversion of Mongol rulers to Islam in the Ilkhanate and to Tibetan Buddhism in China may have marginalized Christian advisors. European crusaders, too, began to doubt the sincerity of the Mongols' religious affiliations. Once promising letters from the steppe were dismissed as unreliable or heretical. And then came the plagues. The Black Death swept across Eurasia, disrupting every known institution. Trade routes collapsed. Patronage networks disintegrated. Perhaps the Nestorian communities, reliant on fragile connections between East and West, were simply lost in the storm, or were they deliberately erased? Some scholars point to suspicious gaps in the records, letters that vanished from monastery archives, ruins that were never fully excavated, decrees that omit once powerful Christian families. Could it be that the rise and fall of Nestorianism in the Mongol court was more than a religious footnote? Could it have been a buried power struggle, hidden beneath layers of conquest and conversion? Today, only the faintest traces remain. In the steppes of Mongolia, in ruined churches across Turkmenistan and northern China, in the barely decipherable inscriptions of ancient tombs, whispers of a faith that once stood beside the great Khans endure. But so much remains unclear. Why did this connection, so promising, so unprecedented, evaporate with barely a trace? What hidden role did Nestorian Christians play in shaping the Mongol world? Were they mere advisors, or architects of empire? And could the answers still lie buried beneath the steppe soil, waiting for a manuscript, a relic, or a forgotten church to bring them back into the light? Beneath the quiet hush of a rising dawn, the wind cuts low across the plains of Inner Asia. A faint trail, scarcely visible yet unmistakably worn, stretches toward the horizon like a scar drawn by centuries of hooves. Along this forgotten road, the sun glints off a weathered post carved with foreign glyphs. Nearby, the crumbled foundations of a stone outpost emerge from the grass, half buried, half remembered. It is all that remains of a vast and enigmatic network. The Yam, the Mongol Empire's legendary relay system. A marvel of logistical planning and imperial control, the Yam was more than a mere series of rest stops for messengers. It was the arterial network through which the lifeblood of the empire flowed: intelligence, orders, secrets. But even today, historians debate how deep its influence truly went, and whether the full extent of its role has ever been fully understood. Officially, the Yam was a relay infrastructure system stretching from the edges of Eastern Europe to the coasts of the Pacific. At its height, it comprised over 1,400 stations, each stocked with fresh horses, supplies, and shelter, allowing a Mongol courier to travel as much as 200 miles in a single day. Riders carried sealed pouches marked with the authority of the Khan himself, and woe to the man who obstructed them. Their passage was sacred, their presence unchallenged. It was, in many ways, the silent force behind the Mongol conquest. Orders from the great Khan in Karakorum could reach generals in distant Persia in mere days. Tax records from China could be reviewed by clerks in Samarkand before the ink dried. Intelligence flowed in real time, rare in any empire, unheard of in the 13th century. But as we look deeper into the operation of the Yam, more questions arise than answers. Who designed it? How was it maintained across such vast and hostile terrain? And could it have served purposes beyond what was recorded in imperial documents? Conventional histories attribute the Yam's refinement to Ögedei Khan, Genghis Khan's son and successor. Under his reign, the network expanded rapidly, connecting outposts with precision. But the idea may not have originated with the Mongols at all. Centuries earlier, the Persian Empire had deployed a system of mounted couriers, and the Tang dynasty in China had maintained organized postal routes. Did the Mongols draw from these examples? Or did they integrate them into something new, something more intricate? Archaeological surveys of old Yam stations reveal more than stables and storage. In some cases, foundations suggest underground chambers, strangely aligned with star charts and cardinal directions. Could some Yam posts have functioned as observatories or temples? In certain excavated sites across Mongolia and northern China, burned fragments of encoded script, neither fully Turkic nor Chinese, have been discovered in the remains of collapsed Yam hubs. Were these merely dispatches, or something more encrypted, more clandestine? Theories begin to stir. Some scholars propose that the Yam functioned not only as a logistical tool, but as an imperial surveillance mechanism. Alongside letters and decrees, could couriers have carried detailed reports about regional governors, military officers, or even rival noble families? The possibility transforms the Yam from an administrative marvel into a tool of centralized intelligence, one that maintained cohesion through quiet control rather than visible force. And yet, there are accounts that suggest something even stranger. Marco Polo wrote of travelers receiving magic tablets, inscribed plaques of authority, that allowed them to access the resources of the Yam. These tablets, or paisi, were said to confer near-sacred immunity, but some accounts ascribe to them supernatural power, claims that they glowed in the dark or changed temperature with the mood of the bearer. Surely these are exaggerations, or are they echoes of something now forgotten? The Mongols were known to blend practical tools with spiritual reverence. A talisman and a command seal may not have been so different in the eyes of the Khans. Was the Yam also a spiritual pathway, mirroring the energy lines of the land? Could its paths have aligned not only with rivers and mountains, but with ancient steppe cosmology? As the Mongol Empire fractured in the 14th century, the Yam too began to unravel, with rival khanates forming across the vast expanse, From the Golden Horde to the Ilkhanate and the Yuan dynasty, coordination became more difficult. The stations fell into disrepair or were repurposed by new rulers for more limited aims. And yet, the memory of the Yam endured. In the Russian principalities, the system was studied and, in some cases, imitated. Later, the Russian Yam postal system bore not just the name, but traces of Mongol influence in design and management. In China, Ming dynasty officials dismantled many of the old Yuan stations, but in some remote areas, remnants of the route remained active for decades. And then, the trail went cold. The empire vanished, the posts collapsed, and the horses, those thousands of imperial mounts bred and rotated at every outpost, disappeared into legend. Today, only fragments remain. Stone foundations, a few bronze paisi recovered from rivers and tombs, shards of correspondence carried across continents, now resting in museum cases with little context. But what else has yet to be found? Could hidden caches of intelligence, sealed in forgotten Yam stations, still lie buried beneath centuries of dust? Could ancient routes, mapped with mathematical precision, conceal deeper alignments with forgotten energy systems or spiritual paths? Was the Yam merely a tool, or something far more sophisticated? A network of power, of vision, of silent control? And if we could follow its full length from sea to steppe, what secrets might still be waiting in the windswept ruins of its silent relay posts? The wind howls low across a frost-bitten plain where the sun never quite rises, its pale light caught in a frozen haze, casting long shadows over a field of white silence. Towering pines, their trunks crusted with rime, stand like sentinels along a deserted trail etched faintly into the snow. Amid the stillness, half buried in ice, lies a curious object. Wooden fragments bound with metal rings, preserved by cold and time. To the casual eye, it's merely debris. To the trained historian, it resembles the haft of a Central Asian spear. But what is a Mongol weapon doing this far north, beyond the bounds of any known conquest? In these icy reaches of northern Siberia, and even the fringes of the Arctic Circle, traces have emerged. Odd relics, strange inscriptions, stories passed down by indigenous tribes, of encounters with a people who came on horseback, wrapped in felt and steel, long ago. Could the Mongols, those masters of the steppe, have ventured deep into the Arctic wilderness? And if so, why? Most maps of the Mongol Empire end in the familiar: China to the east, Persia to the west, and Russia to the north. But records from the 13th and 14th centuries are remarkably sparse when it comes to the empire's northern frontier. The taiga, tundra, and permafrost offered few riches and fewer roads, at least on the surface. And yet, there are hints. In the Yuan Shi, the official chronicle of the Yuan dynasty, a single line references a military envoy sent beyond the great northern forest. No name is given. No outcome described, just a gesture into obscurity. The Russian primary chronicle, although compiled earlier, was edited and recopied during Mongol domination. Some later entries make vague mention of golden riders from the south who reached the lands of the Samoyeds and the Evenks, reindeer-herding peoples of the far north. Still, these accounts are fragmentary, elusive. Is it possible they hint at a forgotten expedition? A scouting party? Or something greater? By the late 13th century, the Mongol grip over Russ's territories was firm. Tribute flowed southward, and outposts sprang up near the Urals and Ob River. From there, the land opens north into the Arctic basin, harsh but not impassable. Could a force have been dispatched to explore this unknown frontier? Perhaps not for conquest, but for knowledge? Speculation deepens when we consider the Mongols' ceaseless quest for understanding their domain. The Khans were not only warriors, but organizers, cartographers, and seekers of hidden truths. Under Möngke and Kublai Khan, teams of astronomers, scholars, and geographers were commissioned to survey the world, mapping stars, rivers, and routes with astonishing precision. Did one of these missions press northward into the endless cold? Archaeological clues only deepen the mystery. In 2011, in the Yamalo-Nenets region of northwest Siberia, Russian archaeologists uncovered several artifacts from a burial mound previously thought to be of local origin. Among them, a saddle buckle bearing clear Mongol design motifs, and the fragment of a silk garment dyed in indigo, of a kind not produced in northern Eurasia at the time. Further east, near the Lena River Delta, local tales among the Yakut people speak of ancient warriors with armor like fish scales who once passed through, never to return. Some elders still recount the southern ghosts who brought fire and strange beasts before vanishing into the snow. Could these be echoes of a forgotten expedition? Or are they the remnants of trade, scattered through secondary contacts? Scholars remain divided. Mainstream historians argue that the northern lands lacked strategic value for the Mongols. No cities to sack, no tribute to extract. Moreover, the cold and terrain posed logistical nightmares for an empire reliant on horses and open plains. And yet, others counter that value can be measured in more than gold. The Arctic held natural wonders the Mongols may have sought. Rare minerals, new furs, unknown flora. And to a people who saw the world in cosmological terms, understanding what lay at the edge of the earth may have held spiritual significance. Could a Khan, perhaps under Kublai's reign, have sanctioned an expedition to the top of the world, not for conquest but for curiosity? And if so, what did they find? Some theories venture further into speculation. A few fringe researchers have suggested that the Mongols may have stumbled upon magnetic anomalies or unusual sky phenomena in the Arctic, auroras that defied their understanding, or polar lights mistaken for omens. Others point to legends of stone towers in the tundra, descriptions that don't match any known indigenous structures. Could they be Mongol observation posts, or simply misinterpretations passed down over generations? Still more provocative are claims of ancient burial sites hidden deep in permafrost, containing bones, weapons, and trappings of steppe warriors. So far, no such site has been conclusively authenticated. But if such a tomb were found, frozen in the Arctic silence, it could reshape our understanding of Mongol exploration forever. In the end, the snow covers all. The Arctic remains a place of secrets, its ancient travelers obscured by ice and time. Perhaps the Mongols never rode this far. Perhaps the stories are only echoes of trade or scattered wanderers. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was once a column of riders who disappeared into the northern mist, never to return. Did they perish? Did they turn back? Or did they find something so unexpected, so world-altering, that it was buried, intentionally or otherwise, in the cold? And if the ice ever melts enough to reveal the truth, what long-forgotten tale might emerge from beneath the frost?